Okay. So, good morning, people. We'd stopped on the last time when we were discussing about the timeline for the whole period up till 1911 or something, right? So, did we talk about the partition of Bengal also in detail, or we did talk about that, right? Yeah. So we'll take it from there, and today primarily, I'll walk you through the PPT. Switch off. Okay. Okay. So, we had not discussed the PPT, right? No, right. Okay, so I'll walk you through the PPT initially, and after this, primarily we had not talked about the Maulle-Minto reforms, right? We just discussed that there were Maulle-Minto reforms, but we had not talked about the details of the Maulle-Minto reforms, right? So we'll do that as well. And then we'll also talk about the militant nationalists at this point of time, some important examples of the militant nationalists, which may become important from your prelims point of view. So after that, after we've talked about the Maulle-Minto reforms, we'll also look into why the partition was annulled and when the partition was annulled or was repealed, actually. And after that, we'll talk about the period leading up to World War I. And that is the period from 1914 onwards. Okay, so we'll first do this and then we'll move on further. Now, when we were talking about the partition of Bengal, I had told you that the official reason given for doing the partition of Bengal was it was administratively too large a unit. And though this was the official reason given, but the actual boundaries that were decided by the British for the two states of Bengal and East Bengal at that point of time basically revealed that the real motive behind the partition was the British desire to weaken Bengal, which was the nerve center of Indian nationalism. And the partition of Bengal was sought to be done along both religious and linguistic lines. And this was to be done on the basis of divisions of both language by reducing Bengalis to a minority speaking, or to a minority meaning that they were no longer to be the largest speaking Bengali speaking population within Bengal, and on the basis of religion, as the western half was to be a Hindu majority and the eastern half a Muslim majority area. So that was there. Now, in the movement against the partition of Bengal, I had told you that, the instruments of boycott and Swadeshi were used for the very first time. And we saw that it was that an essential part of boycott and Swadeshi were importantly used for the very first time in the movement against the partition of Bengal, because this was the very first mass movement. Right? So as I told you that this was the very first mass movement, so if you have to involve the masses, you have to use the means which the masses can use. Now the masses cannot be expected to pick up arms, primarily because not everybody is trained in picking up arms, and secondly, you do not have that kind of organizational capacity also in the first place. So the masses used the strategies of boycott of foreign goods. If you wanted to boycott foreign goods, you should also have access to some other goods which take care of the needs of the economy, and that were to be indigenously made goods. So the whole idea of self-reliance was very central to the movement against partition of Bengal, or the self-reliance, or the idea of Atma Shakti. Okay, now I'm just pointing out to you, you have to understand it in this context. When we went, okay, this is something that will help you connect. When in the post-independence era, the country adopted an import substitution strategy, or the ISI strategy. The import substitution strategy meaning substituting imports with domestic production of goods. The whole idea was to reduce our reliance on imports and be self-reliant. So that whole idea of self-reliance that actually came into existence was partly a result of the whole scenario that was developing in the independence period. One of the constant things, that was happening throughout the independence period was always a focus on this role of foreign capital. How foreign investments, foreign capital, foreign capture of Indian market is actually depriving the Indians of growth. So one of the constant, one of the immediate backlash after independence was doing away with as many imports as possible and being self-reliant in as many arenas as possible. So that's also the link why in the post-independence period we immediately chose a import substitution strategy or an inward-looking strategy. Job economy mein you'll read. Have you people done economy? Yes. Okay, right. So that builds up that context. Now, also to perform or for involving the masses, they also formed groups of volunteers who actually went door to door to explain people what were the real motives of the British to divide Bengal, and only this could ensure involvement of the masses. At the same point of time, they used popular festivals, etc. also to encourage the masses to show their resentment against the partition of Bengal. In fact, there were many such festivals where where Barindra Kumar Ghosh and many other revolutionaries at this point of time actually spoke in many of these festivals, which actually drew crowds of almost to the tune of 20-25,000 on a regular basis. So this was till now the biggest mass involvement ever that had happened at any point of time within the freedom struggle. Okay, so we'll wait for 2 minutes because otherwise it causes too much of distraction. Okay, so the unwritten rule is we start at 9:15, but I started at 9:10 or so. See, the reason is the unwritten rule was existing primarily because it was too cold in between, right? So, but now, obviously, so जैसे जैसे आप average temperature बढ़ता जाए तो वैसे वैसे you should assume that we'll start as close to 9 as possible. So you should come as close to 9 as possible. Okay, so okay, for those who have missed out, you have not missed out anything. It's the same what we have discussed from the last class. It's just that I'm walking you through the PPT. Now, so the emphasis on the reliance of Atma Shakti was focused in the idea of boycott of foreign goods as well as a promotion of Swadeshi or indigenous enterprises. Now the promotion of Swadeshi or indigenous enterprises and the boycott of foreign made goods was not only restricted to the economic arena, but as I told you also to the educational arena, that we should boycott British schools or Western schools and should set up our own educational schools to provide education to the Indian masses, also with a certain degree of political consciousness. So that was what was behind. Now, आपके prelims में एक question आया था 2 years ago that the instruments of boycott and Swadeshi were used for the very first time during when? In the movement against partition of Bengal, in the non-cooperation movement, in the civil disobedience movement. So it's a simple question, right? So as I told you even before, that the significance of the movement against partition of Bengal were broadly 2 or 3. That for the first time, this was that the masses were involved in any significant manner. Secondly, the movement against the partition of, during the movement against the partition of Bengal, the experiences that were drawn were to later, guide the future mass movements, and the techniques which later came to be associated with Gandhian mode of struggle, such as Swadeshi and boycott, were for the first time implemented here. And what goes to the credit of Gandhi is the fact that he incorporated these or implemented these policies of Swadeshi and boycott in a more disciplined manner. Okay, so yes, he was more successful in implementing these strategies, but they were tried and tested for the first time in the movement against partition of Bengal. And the lessons learned here were to guide the future generation of, or the future mass struggles. Also, there were developments in the cultural sphere. For example, poets like Rabindranath Tagore played an important role in actually inspiring the masses by writing down the song Amar Sonar Bangla. Okay, and in many ways, the strategies of mass resistance that later came to be associated with Gandhian politics were first used during this movement. So that is there. Now, I had told you that in the run-up to this, while the mass movement was on, there was a significant divide between the moderates and the extremists. And it was in this divide between the moderates and extremists with respect to the crucial question of whether or not to extend the mass movement outside Bengal. While the extremists led by Tilak wanted to do so, the moderates were not in opinion to do so. To deny Tilak the presidency of the Congress in 1907, the session was held in Surat, and this primarily led to the divide of the moderates, or the split of the Congress between the moderates and the extremists. Now, I had also told you, so but before that, as I told you, that in 1906, Dadabhai Naoroji was the president, and it was in 1906 itself that Congress adopted the goal of attaining Swaraj, or self-government on the line of white British colonies. And this self-government was to be attained through constitutional means. I told you that not through extra constitutional means, but through constitutional means. Because the clause through constitutional means was introduced so as to pacify the moderates, and the demand for Swaraj was to meant as an attempt to pacify the extremists. But nonetheless, their differences could not be resolved. And one finds that this is what led to the split. Nonetheless, in 1906, also a resolution was passed for supporting Swadeshi, boycott and national education. At the same point of time, the extremists gave a call for white passive resistance and boycott of schools, colleges, legislative councils, etc. Everything. So the idea of a boycott was that if you refuse to cooperate with the British, then the British will be forced to leave India. Now, moderates were at the same point of time, I told you that in the impending period, or just before, or a couple of months before the Surat conference, or the 1907 conference of the Congress, the British had announced their intention to send a committee to India which will look into the question of legislative council reforms again. And it was this committee, that was Maullya Minto committee, which was promised to primarily the moderates who were always looking for expansion and strengthening the legislative council, which appealed to the moderates. And so this was a kind of a carrot which was shown to the moderates, whereas once the moderates were agreeing, or were agreed to the idea of negotiating with the government, it also became very clear that now the split was kind of unresolvable, or unavoidable, in the sense that the split was bound to happen because the moderates were looking for constitutional reforms, whereas the extremists wanted to extend the movement outside Bengal. So this is what led to the split in 1907, when Congress came to be dominated by moderates who lost no time in restating the support to the goal of self-government within the British Empire and to constitutional methods only to achieve this goal. So this is what led to the split, and after the split, immediately the extremists were suppressed, in the sense that Tilak was jailed for 6 years, Aurobindo Ghosh retired from politics, Lala Lajpat Rai left for London. And so you see that the top leadership of the extremists was wiped out in a very small time. And this meant that extremists, who were the individuals who enjoyed mass support, were taken away. So the masses were left without a leader, and the moderates never enjoyed very high mass popularity. So the Surat split in a way weakened both the moderates and the extremists, and moreover, it weakened the national movement. It is also the significance of the Surat split that I told you, that the Surat split happened in 1907 and it lasted up till 1960. Okay, so this divide of the Congress was more than a 1 decade phenomena. So for more than 1 decade, because of this split, it weakened not just the moderates and the extremists individually, but the Congress as an institution as a whole. So to that extent, one finds that, what they learned from this split was, one of the things that was, wisdom dawned upon both the moderates and extremists in the manner that they learned this aspect, that in spite of whatever the individual differences were, they should not allow them to come in a manner to become so large that they become unreproachable, or they could not be bridged. And if at all, and at all costs, what should be avoided is a split of the Congress again. We will see that in 1920s also there were crucial differences of thought between the Swarajists and the No Changers and other sections of the Congress. But this did not see a repeat of the 1907 split. So the Congress had learnt its lesson that whatever be the ideological differences of different members of Congress, that should not be allowed to divide or weaken the Congress, because it has a detrimental effect on the freedom struggle itself. So one finds that the top leadership of the extremists was taken away. And for a long period of time, we have talked about enough about what were the weaknesses of the moderates, that the moderate lacked a mass base, that the moderates never made radical demands. But for the first time, we look at the weaknesses of the extremists also. Even when the extremists parted ways with the moderates, the extremists never could form an alternative political party of their own. They could never capitalize on the mass support that they had in the first place. And so this meant that once the mass support and once the leadership was taken away, there was no basis to sustain this mass support. Now, so for example, I'll just give you two very contextual examples and just see the stark difference. I mean, we often do not see that, but if you just apply your mind a bit, you can see it. The India Against Corruption movement was a movement which had a huge middle class support from urban centers, etc. And Kejriwal capitalized on it and formed a political party. So one could say that the strengths of Kejriwal was, whether he turns out to be a good political leader or bad, time will tell. But he was able to capitalize on the masses and sustain beyond the movement into and give it a concrete shape of a political party. In contrast, let me give you another example. And this is actually more thought-provoking. The December 12th rape case also witnessed a huge upsurge of people who primarily or of people who fought again or who were of the opinion that the government should bring in new laws and should enforce them in a better manner to protect harassment of women. But you did not see the movement turning into a political party which could sustain the support of its supporters, or which could have the support of its supporters in the first place. It just became a one-off incident that it was a cause because of which people came together and they again dissipated. So in the context, anti-corruption movement also was on the Lokpal bill, but it was Kejriwal's whatever political acumen that he used the incident to build his whole political career and a political party. But you didn't see anything of this sort happening in the December 12th rape case. It was just a case, yes, the Verma committee happened and that's it. Right? So he was, in a way, Kejriwal was able to channelize whatever anger was there. So why cannot be there a women's party in India? Right? Or if a women's party is based on if you have political parties based on the identity of caste, on religion, on culture, on region, on language, why couldn't there be a political party based on gender? Very easily it could have been possible. But in the sense, it gives you two contrast examples of how there was someone who could capitalize on that and then there was another who couldn't, right? So I'm just, in that context, one of the examples here, the weakness of the extremists thus was this, that they could never effectively build an alternate party to capitalize on the mass movement, or to capitalize on their support of the masses, right? If the weakness of the moderates was that they never had mass movement, or they never had the support of the masses, the weakness of the extremists was that they were never able to effectively organize. And again, the masses were to be involved in a significant manner within the freedom struggle only with the arrival of Gandhi. So this is Gandhi's contribution. Frankly, Gandhi's contribution, yes, whether it is non-violence, and those are his ideas of strategies, his political ideas and his strategies. But his effective contribution actually was that he could bring the masses within the freedom struggle on a sustained manner. Okay, whenever broadly he wanted, he could bring the masses within the freedom struggle. There was no other political leader before Gandhi, at least, who enjoyed this kind of command. So that was his contribution. For example, again, just to contextualize, you could never have imagined that Manmohan Singh could have pulled off demonetization in the manner that Narendra Modi has. Primarily because Narendra Modi enjoys a way more mass appeal than Manmohan Singh. It's another matter that Narendra Modi has not put it to very effective use. But nonetheless, he has mass appeal. That is why demonetization, in spite of the hardships that has caused to people, has not suffered that kind of criticism. If this would have been done by Manmohan Singh, It would have been like, the media would have gone after him like cats and dogs. But nonetheless. So after 1908, thus as a direct impact of the Surat split was that the movement suffered a decline, and that was to pick up only after Tilak was released from jail in 1914, and there was a reunification of Congress from 1916 onwards. We'll talk about this. So the British strategy in dealing with the partition of Bengal or in dealing with the Congress at this point of time was this three-pronged strategy of RCS, or repression, conciliation and suppression, as I had told you before, right? We talked about repression, conciliation and suppression? No, we hadn't. Okay. So the whole idea of repression, conciliation and suppression is this only, that the first step of the British was that they wanted to intimidate the Congress. And to intimidate the Congress, initially in dealing with the movement against partition of Bengal, they resorted to mild suppression, or what is termed as repression. A mild suppression in the sense that they just lathi charged a few movements here and there, okay? They never captured the political leaders, they never imprisoned the political leaders or anything, they just cracked down on a few movements. And this was to send a message across to the Congress that if the Congress soon did not give up its mass movement, then in that scenario, the government can actually imprison the leaders as well. And this was to send a message to the Congress, and at the same point of time, also to offer them some incentive to refrain from the mass movement. They gave them the carrot of Morley Minto reforms. And at the same point of time, to ensure that the extremists, those who were not willing to negotiate, that they were taught a lesson also, and the movement was dealt with a heavy hand also. Later the later the British resorted to a strong suppression. Now what do I mean by a strong suppression is basically that all the top political leaders of the extremists were imprisoned or were forced to retire from politics. So this was the three-pronged strategy. The first was repression, the second was conciliation, and the third was suppression. Now some of you will be thinking, what is the difference between repression and suppression? The only difference between repression and suppression is in terms of degrees. Okay, so repression was only a form of mild suppression where the top political leaders of the extremists were not actually imprisoned. But in suppression, the focus was on the political leaders and not on the masses. Okay, so that was the British strategy, and this can also be called as their carrot and stick policy. And the same carrot and stick policy, we will see, was used in 1919 also. I mean, you can write it down here, but we'll explain it later. That on the one hand, the government introduced the Montagu-Chelmsford reforms, or the Government of India Act of 1919, and on the other side it introduced the Rowlatt Act. Okay, the Rowlatt Act was also a suppressive measure that we'll talk about, and the promise of legislative council reforms was the Government of India Act 1919. Now by 1908, the open phase of the movement ended. Now, what do we mean by the open phase of the movement? We basically want to say is that once the extremist leadership was taken away, the mass movement came to an end. And after this, whatever activities were happening in the areas of militant nationalism, or in the scenario where young individuals had picked up arms against the British. So the open phase came to an end with this police repression, apart from other reasons. Why the open phase that we've already discussed, that extremist leadership, etc. was taken away, Congress underwent a split. Apart from all these reasons, the only other reason that I've not told you is that the movement had been going on for a long period of time, up from 1905 onwards, and more so from 1906, almost for 2 years. It is not possible to sustain a mass movement indefinitely. Okay, because the masses also have other preoccupations in their lives, and they cannot just not everybody can devote themselves 24/7 for one particular cause. They have competing responsibilities in other spheres also. So that is the reason why one thing to understand is, and that is what Gandhi understood perfectly well, not just when to launch the movement, but when to call off the movement. Okay, so that was because of the fatigue. Also, the movement declined. So due to severe government repression, the movement declined. The movement also, through an array of techniques that later came to be associated with Gandhian politics, this can be more not a reason for decline, but more of the significance of the movement itself. But the problem with these techniques was that they failed to give these techniques a more disciplined focus. They were not very effective in implementing. They were the ones to come up with the idea and implement it, but the degree of implementation was not as effective, as we'll see later in the Gandhian era. And most of these extremist leaders were either deported or jailed by the end of 1908. There was a divide in the political leadership. Also, the limited nature of mass participation. Dekhiye, I have told you that the masses participated for the first time here. But the kind of mass participation that was witnessed here was not as big a mass participation as we'll see in 1917 onwards. So to that extent, the mass participation was not as huge as was witnessed in the later generations of the struggle. And here, while the masses participated, the participation was primarily limited to the upper middle class and also to the middle and lower classes, but primarily in the urban areas. The youth was involved, the urban centers of the populations were involved in a big way, but the peasantry was not involved in a big way. Okay, because the peasantry came to be associated with the freedom struggle only during the Gandhian struggle in a meaningful manner. And also that because of the fact that it was difficult to sustain a mass movement at a high pitch for too long. Now, if this much is clear, the significance of the mass movement was that this was the first movement with a mass base, and it touched upon sections that had not been included till now, whether it was students, women, and certain sections of the urban population also. Also, the Swadeshi campaign undermined the hegemony of colonial ideas and institutions. The whole idea of Swadeshi was that we could depend and rely on ourselves for fulfilling our own needs. And it wasn't that we need the British, or the British are actually either invincible or we cannot survive without British rule in India. Also, the third important point was that the future struggles were to draw heavily from the experiences gained here. In terms of the participation of Muslims, what has to be understood, as I told you before, like that I had told you that in 1906, there was a section of landed elites from East Bengal who actually offered their support to the British for the partition of Bengal. Now, these landed elites offered the support to the British for the partition of Bengal because primarily they wanted to retain their privileges in the East Bengal region. Now, so Nawab Salimullah of Decca was the erstwhile Nawab of Dhaka. Also, there were people like Aga Khan who were important Nawabs in these region. So these were the people who actually supported the partition, and that is why they went to Shimla to express their support to Lord Curzon, where they gave it in writing. And so, you know, in the sense, why the British were also, you know, looking at, and this is something that I've not explained to you before, but I'll explain it to you now, is the formation of the Muslim League and the changes that Muslim League underwent. Okay, we have not talked about this. That Muslim League was formed in 1906, and in contrast, and this is where you see that Muslim League, which was formed in 1906, was very different from the Congress since its inception, in the sense that Congress was formed by middle class individuals, whereas the Muslim League was formed by landed elites. So the Muslim League ke jo interests the, they themselves were very different from the interests of the Congress. So the Muslim League, which was primarily composed of the landed elites, wanted to retain its own princely and erstwhile privileges, whatever they had from before. And they realized that they can retain their privileges more easily by trying to offer their loyalty to the British. Now, one of the reasons why they also, you know, envisioned, or why they also thought of offering their loyalty to the British rather than, you know, joining the anti-imperialist struggle, was primarily of what was known as the Aligarh school of thought. The Muslim League was inspired in many ways by the Aligarh school of thought. Now, what is this Aligarh school of thought? The whole idea of the Aligarh school of thought by Syed Ahmad Khan and others was, now, Syed Ahmad Khan was of the opinion that for the upliftment of the Muslims, what Muslims need very, acutely is access to education and access to government jobs. So, Syed Ahmad Khan was of the opinion that what Muslims need and what is responsible for backwardness amongst Muslims is their educational and occupational deprivation. So to provide education and occupation, the Muslims needed access to these things, and the access to these things could come only, he was of the opinion that access to these things could come only if the Muslims did not pick up a fight with the British again. What he meant by again was that just like you had done so in 1857 and we had to bear the brunt of opposition by the British and neglect at the hands of the British, it should not happen again. So Syed Ahmad Khan had given, in his opinion, Syed Ahmad Khan said that we should refrain from participating in any direct political activity against the British, because that will lead to more deprivation or more educational deprivation and occupational deprivation, and that is not in the interest of Muslims. So the Aligarh school of thought basically did not join the anti-imperialist struggle, primarily fearing a backlash from the British. So the consequence of this was, but then if at all they were not to join the movement against the British, how could they attract British attention for greater access to education and jobs? Was by offering their loyalty and support to the British Empire. And this was primarily with the expectation that the British will reply, the British will reciprocate back with more jobs and more access to education. Okay, that was the unwritten, belief that, or the unwritten expectation that they had. Okay, quite similar to the expectation, for example, like the social reformers had in 1830s, that the British will play an important role in bringing about social reforms, which later turned out to be the fact that British were not very serious about social reforms in the very first place. So in a similar manner, the Aligarh school of thought basically professed loyalty to the British, and the Muslim League also in many ways, was trying to draw its inspiration from the Aligarh school of thought itself. On top of that, the leaders of the Muslim League, apart from this issue, the leaders of the Muslim League also wanted to retain their erstwhile privileges, right? So all of this, their interest in retaining the erstwhile privileges and the belief that offering their support to the British would be reciprocated with access to jobs and education is what led to the Muslim League offering its loyalty to the British. Now, when this happened, the British were very happy in many ways to find that there was a section of political elites within the Indian population which did not agree with the Congress. Because we will see over a period of time, the Congress, that the Britishers were more than happy in using the Muslim League also to point out a very simple fact, that Congress does not enjoy hegemony, or Congress does not enjoy universal support amongst Indians. Congress was just one of the voices. Okay? So if Congress was just one of the voices, it does not mean that the government needs to be very, the government needs to listen only to the Congress. Okay, if there is one section of the political elites, or there is one section of the masses who oppose the partition of Bengal, then that is led by the Congress. But then there is another section of the population which supports. It doesn't matter whether this organization of Muslim League actually enjoyed mass support or not. Because Muslim League was formed in 1906 and these people did not have any mass backing. Just like Congress, when it was formed in 1885, did not have any significant mass involvement. So in many ways one could, I'm just, for your understanding, I'm saying, the Muslim League of 1906 was like the Congress of 1885. So And this the Britishers also knew, that the Muslim League did not enjoy some very big mass support. Okay, but still the coming on the platform of another political formation which supported the British policy was somehow was a huge relief for the British also, and was used as an instrument by the British to point out how, you know, there is no consensus among the Indian population. There is a part of the Indian population which wants to go ahead with the partition, and there is another which doesn't want. Right? So in a way, Muslim League, the coming up of Muslim League was something that was better or good for the British, because it weakened the bargaining power of Congress vis-a-vis the Britishers. Okay, so that's the context and why British were also actively, you know, fomenting the rise of the Muslim League and supported the rise of the Muslim League. Lekin, this will come to later in the PPT, but this was to change, or the mindset within the Muslim League was to change, we will see, after 1914. I'm telling this here only because we're discussing about the Muslim League, so let's discuss here only. That after 1914, there was a change in the mindset primarily because of certain reasons within the Muslim League. And from being the loyalist of the British, from 1914 onwards, the Muslim League went on to become an anti-imperialist power. There were many reasons for this. Firstly, one of the things that happened was that in 1911 the partition of Bengal was annulled, or the partition of Bengal was repealed. So those Muslim League leaders who had supported the partition were not very happy. Okay. On top of that, also what had happened was that there had been a generational change within the Muslim League also in a span of 10 decades, in a span of a decade or so. In the sense that those who later went on to join the Muslim League, such as Muhammad Ali Jinnah, Liaquat Ali Khan, and many others, those who later went on to join the Muslim League, or the younger Muslim League members, did not agree with the people like Aga Khan and Nawab of Dhaka. In the sense, they were of the opinion that yes, we had suffered a backlash at the hands of British in the immediate post-1857 period. But in spite of professing loyalty to the British from 1870s and 80s onwards, not anything substantial or meaningful has been done for the Muslim population by the British. So in the long-term interest, it is not very useful for Muslims also to actually align with the British. And so they were of the opinion that professing this continued loyalty to the British has not been very effective in terms of granting access to education or jobs to the Muslims. And so they were also of the opinion that the Muslim League should adopt a more important anti-imperialist strand. And that is why we will see that after 1914, more so from 1916, the Congress and Muslim League came together in their anti-imperialist struggle. And just for your curiosity, Jinnah himself had a lot to share with the Congress, in the sense that Jinnah himself was a lawyer, had studied in London for a long period of time. Jinnah also from 1906 onwards was a member of Congress as well as Muslim League both. Okay, and there was nothing in Jinnah that Muslims today would want to follow. He used to drink liquor, he never kept a beard, and he in every sense of the term was the antithesis of what Pakistan is today. Okay, so in the sense that what often political leaders, you know, profess at times maybe at complete odds with what is, you know, actually happening in their personal lives. But nonetheless, that was Jinnah's understanding. And so Jinnah, so you know, why I'm telling you this story is because of two reasons. Firstly, I wanted to point to you out one important fact, that whenever we say the Muslim League, it does not mean automatically that the Muslim League enjoys the support of Muslims. Just like the BJP doesn't enjoy the support of all sections of one religious community. right? So the Muslim League also did not enjoy automatically the support of, or was not a mass party, because it was a party specifically of the landed elites. And in a similar manner, in response to the Muslim League, another party that was formed was the Hindu Mahasabha from 1914-1915 onwards. Now, one of the core ideologies of the Muslim League was that there were certain interests of the Muslim League, or there were certain interests of the Muslims which were not catered to by the Congress, and they often accused the Congress at times initially of not doing enough to protect Muslim interests. And soon thereafter came a political party, and that was the Hindu Mahasabha, which accused the Congress of exactly the opposite thing, that the Congress was not doing enough to protect the Hindu interests. Today at times the RSS accuses the BJP of not doing enough to protect the Hindu interests. For example, one of the core demands of the RSS today, which has been that you had been talking of building the Ram Mandir in Ayodhya from 1993, and you had always been saying that we didn't have a majority in the parliament to do so, but now you have the majority. So even if you don't do it now, and even if you don't promise it before the UP elections, that means you're not going to do it. So there is a section within the RSS which is very dissatisfied with the BJP right now. Okay, but I'm just showing you in the sense that often political parties face such accusations. I'm not saying that whether it should be built or not. I'm not even getting into that. I'm just telling you how things happen. Now, if this has to be understood, ये point मैं आपसे इसलिए कह रहा हूँ क्योंकि आप लोगों के कई लोगों के दिमाग में एक सवाल आएगा बहुत जल्दी, that from the formation of Muslim leagues did it become inevitable? Because ये आपके मेंस में एक सवाल आ चुका है, that was partition inevitable? Okay, or if partition was inevitable, then when did it become inevitable? Or if it was not inevitable, then why did it happen in the first place? तो हम इन सारे सवालों के बारे में बहुत बाद में बात करेंगे. But for now, you only understand that the Muslim League was formed as a political party, but initially it did not enjoy a mass base for a very long period of time. Also, the Muslim League was formed with an inspiration from the Aligarh school of thought, and the Aligarh school of thought wanted what? It wanted to ensure access to education and jobs to Muslims. And to that extent, this was a similar kind of demand, for example, that Ambedkar was making in 1930s for the backward caste. That he wanted an assured political representation as well as access to education and jobs for the backward caste. So if Ambedkar could be reconciled, and Ambedkar was more anti-Gandhi than Jinnah was, okay? And if Ambedkar could reconcile with the Congress, then there was no reason to believe that either Jinnah or the Muslim League could not have reconciled with the Congress. Okay, and it was much later to answer this question whether partition was inevitable or not. We'll come to the fact that it was very late in the 1940s actually that partition became inevitable. Before that it wasn't. And one of the reasons why we also say that what is the proof to say that the Muslim League was not a mass organization from its initial period is the results of the successive elections that followed from 1919 onwards. So in almost all these successive elections up till the 1937 election, the Muslim League did not register any significant victories. Okay, so this is the only, because if we say that the Muslim League did not enjoy mass base, what is the proof that we have? And that is the support that, the kind of victories that they could register in the elections. And Muslim League did not register many significant victories up till 1937 also. It was only in the 1946 elections actually that the Muslim League won almost a very big significant section of the population. So we'll see that, but that is what I wanted to point out to you, that the later generation of the Muslim League outgrew the limited outlook of the Aligarh school of thought. And rather than offering loyalty to the British, the later generation of Muslim Leagues acquired also a very strong anti-imperialist orientation. Okay, so that is the generational change. जैसे हमने moderate extremists के बारे में बात की थी, वैसे ही older Muslim League members और newer Muslim League members में भी there was a generational change. Okay, now that I've discussed, now I'm sure that we've not discussed militant nationalism nor the Molle-Minto reforms in greater detail. So we'll talk about both militant nationalism and Molle-Minto reforms in greater detail now. देखिए, when we are talking about militant nationalism, ये militant nationalism भी कह सकते हैं आप, इसको revolutionary terrorism भी कह सकते हैं. Okay, I'll come to the questions in a minute. Yeah. Okay. So how many feel that we're going slow? Okay. So we'll increase the pace a bit, and that way. Acha, how many feel we're not going slow? So the class already has a divide. Some feel we are going slow, some feel we are not going slow. So we'll maybe increase the speed a bit, okay? A bit, but not too much, okay? So a bit is like 20%, okay? So 20% should be manageable for everyone. देखिए, so in terms of militant nationalism, in your books, in almost all the books that you refer, the term that has been used is revolutionary terrorism, but I'll suggest you not to use revolutionary terrorism, but rather use militant nationalism because of the recent controversy that has been around the term. So you can use the term militant nationalism in place of revolutionary terrorism. Now, when we talk about revolutionary terrorism, what has to be understood is that once the open phase of the movement ended, there was a certain section of the youth population which wanted to do something. And because they could not carry out a mass movement, they resorted to individual violent actions against the British. Now, the individual violent actions against the British were inspired by the actions of the Irish guerrilla forces or the Irish militant nationalists in Ireland itself. Now, the Irish were also fighting, or Ireland was also fighting for independence from Britain. And there, basically, a number of armed revolutionaries had resorted to the simple tactic that they would focus and use guerrilla tactics to focus upon British important officials of British Empire, to kill them, to assassinate them, or carry out a number of political assassinations to strike fear in the minds of the British rulers in Ireland. So inspired by the Irish guerrilla forces, also there were a number of political attempts at political assassination within Bengal, specifically on this issue of movement against partition of Bengal. And a number of these were going on from 1908 to 1911. Also, so that was one of the things. And the second thing was the only important organization जो आपको बंगाल में इस टाइम पे याद रखनी है, and that is the Anushulan Samiti. Now the Anushulan Samiti was formed by Barindra Kumar Ghosh and Bhupendranath Datta. And it was this Anushulan Samiti which basically also carried out bomb making. It tried to assassinate a number of British officials primarily in Bengal. Now outside Bengal also there was militant activity. For example, they tried to set up a bomb manufacturing and a gun manufacturing factory in Pune, Nasik and all those areas in Maharashtra also. So there was militant activity both in Bengal and also in Maharashtra at this point of time. And so basically, the militant nationalists took the part of individual heroism and revolutionary terrorism inspired by the activities of the Irish nationalists. And they attempted to assassinate unpopular British officials like Lord Curzon, because Curzon they attempted. Curzon wasn't assassinated, okay? So Curzon, because Curzon was the main architect of the partition of Bengal, so they wanted to kill Curzon, but obviously they couldn't. They were unsuccessful in killing Curzon, but they did attempt certain lower level of British officials within India at this point of time. And this was done with the aim of striking terror in the heart of rulers and arouse the patriotic instincts of the masses. Now, also, this is later something that we'll see in the time of Bhagat Singh also, that their idea was that if at all they were arrested and they were put on trial, they would want to use their trial as a political trial by which they could actually inspire even more members of the younger generation. So in Bengal, there was the Anushulan Samiti, which was started by Barindra Kumar Ghosh and Bhupendranath Datta. They also started the newspaper Yugantar, इसका भी आपको नाम याद रखना है. And basically in Yugantar, they basically wrote many a times about why the Indians should pick up arms against the British. And Also, so apart from this, in Maharashtra, they were, देखिए, अभी ये जो मैंने आपके सामने लिखा है, for example, in Maharashtra, they were the Chapekar brothers who were responsible for killing of the plague commissioner at that point of time in 1890s, in 1897. This is not related to the partition of Bengal, but this is the first, one of the most important militant activities that happened in 1890s. Okay. Now I told you that Tilak was imprisoned from 1906 to 1914. Tilak was also imprisoned in 1890s for a period of 1.5 years. That was primarily because Tilak said in one of the Shivaji festivals that just like Shivaji has thrown away the outsider, we should throw away the outsider. Inspired by his speech, the Chapekar brothers basically assassinated the plague commissioner of Pune. This happened primarily because at that point of time, plague was rampant in Pune, and the then plague commissioner actually gave a number of orders for mass eviction from Pune, and these orders were implemented in the manner, though were implemented in the larger public health interest, but were implemented in a manner which caused huge loss of life and livelihood of the masses. The result was that because of these, the manner in which the policy was implemented, the Chapekar brothers decided to teach the British a lesson, and that is why they killed the commissioner. Also, V.D. Savarkar had formed the organization Mitra Mela, which later merged with Abhinav Bharat. So Abhinav Bharat, आपको ये पता होना चाहिए कि Abhinav Bharat हो गई, Mitra Mela हो गया, और the Chapekar brothers, they were all associated with militant nationalism at this point of time. Okay, now let's come to the Morley-Minto reforms, which is extremely important from your prelims point of view. देखिए, Morley-Minto reforms के आपको certain characteristics याद रखने हैं that are in continuity with 1861 and 1892. So, like we had seen in 1861, we had seen that the Legislative Council was formed for the first time. In 1892, we had seen that the Legislative Council was expanded, more Indians were included. Now, as compared to 1892, in 1909, the Legislative Council was expanded further. So, if we see, मेरे हिसाब से पर्सनली आप सबको पता है क्या करना चाहिए एक पॉइंट के बाद. वंस वी डन 1861, 92, 1909, 1990, 1935, एक पेज पे एक ऐसी टेबल बना के सबके पॉइंट्स आपने लिख लिया, एंड दैट इज वेरी इजी टू रिवाइज later. Okay. Now, so in 1861, the first time the Legislative Council was formed, but they had no right to discuss or vote on the budget. In 1892, they had the right, this was the time when the element of election was introduced for the first time. Because I told you here, there was no election of Indians. Indians were included, but they were basically appointed by the British, and they were the landed elites. But the element of election was introduced for the first time, and they got the right to discuss the budget. But still, they could not vote on the budget. So in contrast to this, the Morley-Minto reforms were, in a way, a direct response partly to the demands of the moderates and partly to the demands of the Muslim League. Because the Muslim Leagues wanted to preserve their princely privileges or the erstwhile privileges, what the Muslim League wanted was, with the Shimla deputation, was an assured political representation for Muslims. And so the Muslim League demanded separate electorates for Muslims. What is separate electorates? Very simply, what is separate electorates and how is it different from joint electorates with reservation for minorities? It is important to understand that separate electorates means that, say, if I am a Muslim or I am a Christian, then if I am a Sikh, and if I want separate electorates for Muslims or Christians or Sikhs, I will say that if I am a Muslim, I want separate electorates for Muslims. That means if a constituency is reserved for Muslims, then only a Muslim individual can contest from that seat, and only a Muslim can vote. Okay, that means separate electorate. But if I say that this seat is reserved for Muslims and this is a joint electorate, meaning only a Muslim can contest the elections, but everybody can vote. For example, today in Panchayats, 1/3 of the seats are reserved for women, right? That means only from 1/3 seat only women can contest, whereas everybody votes, right? So in contrast to separate electorates, there is also an idea of joint electorates with reservation of seats for minorities. Why I'm telling you this is because कई मेरे से क्लास के बाद आके पूछेगा, and we'll also use this later. Okay, this difference thus is important to understand. So what they demanded separate electorates for Muslims. Now a demand for separate electorates for Muslims is, you see, the genesis in many ways of the idea of communalism. Okay, that you are saying that there is a section of the population which belongs to one particular religion, and people who belong to this religion have political concerns which are different from that of the rest of the population. Okay, so in many ways this was something that was unacceptable to the Congress, because the Congress firstly was of the opinion that this activity of separate electorate was an active strategy of dividing the Indian masses along religious lines. So, but one of the crucial demands of the Shimla deputation was this demand for separate electorates, and we will see that in the Morley-Minto reforms, one of the first demands that was to be met was this demands for the was this demand for the separate electorates. That separate electorates for Muslims were introduced for the first time. So this is the first point that you need to remember when you talk about the Morley-Minto reforms. Now, also, as I told you before, that as compared to 1892, at both the central level and the provincial levels, the size of the Legislative Council was increased and more Indians were brought within them. Now, more Indians were brought within them. When I am saying more Indians, these Indians were both elected and unelected. Just like in 1892, where the right to vote was with less than 1% of the population, because women had no right to vote, so आधी population तो वैसे ही हट गई. And even amongst men, the right to vote was given on the basis of occupation of land and educational qualifications, etc. So even here, the right to vote was very limited. Also, so there were Indians who were both elected as well as unelected. The unelected Indians were appointed by the British directly. Why am I telling you so? This is because of an interrelated point. And this is the point number 2, which is that in the provinces, अब देखिए ये point आपको समझ में आए चाहे ना आए, इससे कोई फर्क नहीं पड़ता. But because ये मैं इसलिए बता रहा हूँ क्योंकि आप में से कुछ बोलेंगे कि नहीं आया समझ में. So that is because this is not something that is very important, but it's okay that if you know it, because ऐसा नहीं होना चाहिए आपको बस मुस्लिम आपको 1909 रिफॉर्म्स के बारे में बस एक ही चीज पता है, सेपरेट इलेक्टोरेट, क्योंकि इट इज अनलाइकली कि क्वेश्चन में सिर्फ सेपरेट इलेक्टोरेट पे ही क्वेश्चन आ जाए. So this is a point that one can focus upon, that for the first time Indians were in a majority. तो ये पहली बार हो रहा है that in 1861 Indians were introduced, in 1892 elections were introduced, but for the first time it is happening that if say in a provincial council there were 100 members, then out of these 100, more than 50 were Indians. So Indians were in the majority in the first time, but these Indians were both elected and unelected. But even when Indians were in a majority, still the non-elected members continued to be in the majority. Okay, basically what happened was that out of these 100, say if 49 were British, 51 were Indians, but out of these 51 Indians, only 26 or 27, one could say, I'm just giving you random figures, okay, out of these Indians, 51 Indians, only 27 were to be the ones who were to be elected. The rest of 24, or whatever is the number. What is the number? The rest, 51 minus 27 is what? 24 only, right? Okay, so the rest 24 were to be appointed by the British. So these were Indians who were not elected but were appointed by the British. So that meant that even when Indians were in a majority, the non-elected majority remained. नहीं आया समझ में नहीं आ गया? That even the non-official majority was introduced. Non-official मतलब non-British majority was introduced, but overall the non-elected majority remained. ये वही line है जो आपकी book में लिखी है. I'm just explaining you the meaning of this line. Okay? It is just like saying that the biggest political party which has the largest number of seats today is the BJP. But still the BJP enjoys the support only of 30% of the vote share. Right? It is the largest party, but still it is a minority party. Right? So that I'm just giving you an example, a metaphor. कि कहते they are not the same thing. Okay? So आपको जो important बात याद रख लेनी चाहिए that this was the first time then Indians were in a majority. Okay? That is there. But even in 1909, women did not have a right to vote. Okay? So that's also, okay, हम देखेंगे the women got the right to vote only in 1919. Okay? So indirectly, women did not have a right to vote here also. Also, for the first time, one Indian was to be appointed to the Viceroy's Executive Council. That was there. Now, when we talk about evaluation of reforms, I have not told you that what kind of control that they had on the budget. Right? The voting power on the budget was still not granted in any significant manner. So that problem of control over the budget actually continued. Why? The British were not very eager to grant voting rights on the budget, because budget, if they were to make the budget accountable to Indians, then why are they ruling India in the first place? Right? Agar yahi hona hai, then why not just grant them all accountability and leave India? Right? So that is why they held this on very closely, and it was even much later in 1935, we'll see that they're giving control only of some very small part of the budget and 25% of the budget. Okay, so they're very reluctant to do this. But on the other hand, when you look at the impact or the significance of reforms of 1909, it was a part of the British divide and rule policy, and it played a crucial role in dividing the moderates and the extremists on the one side, and also the Hindus and the Muslims on the other. तो क्योंकि कई बच्चे जब मोहल्ले मिंटो रिफॉर्म्स के इम्पैक्ट के बारे में लिखते हैं, they only write about this fact that it was a part of the divide and rule policy vis-a-vis the Hindus and the Muslims. But it was actually also something that helped to divide the moderates and the extremists that led up to the Surat split, because the promise of these reforms came much before. Also, these reforms left the Indians dissatisfied, because the moderates also were dissatisfied with both the pace of the reforms and the substance of the reforms, because they realized that even when the Legislative Council was expanded, it was not being granted any meaningful powers in the very first place. So in the form, the significance of, or when one evaluation of the reforms of 1909 was that the reforms gave the people of the country a shadow rather than substance of self-government. It gave them shadow, meaning because they were not significant in any meaningful manner. And while the people had demanded self-government, what they got was benevolent despotism. ये आपकी किताब की word-to-word line है, but I've just put it here, is to explain this line कि आपने मांगा था तो that you had demanded meaningful, substantial reforms, but what the British said, okay, you've been demanding for a long time, so okay, you can have this. Which was in no way addressing the real issue. So you had been demanding 15 lakh rupees in your account, so the government gave you demonetization. So that was there. Now, the next important thing is, now we'll carry on here. You can draw a timeline with me up till the period for 1921. You started with what? Geography these days, right? Okay. देखिए, geography is also very important. सीधे सीधे geography और ecology का overlap भी बहुत ज़्यादा है. Okay? तो मतलब अगर आप prelims में geography या ecology के basics के question, मतलब if you don't do कि endangered species कौन सी कहाँ मिलती है, it's okay. लेकिन अगर आप basic El Nino, you know, high pressure winds कहाँ से कहाँ blow करती हैं, ocean currents गलत करके आ रहे हैं, तो आपका नहीं होगा. तो प्लीज, मतलब मैं इसलिए कह रहा हूं कि नाउ दैट इज द टाइम टू रन अप टू द प्रीलिम्स. डोंट मिस आउट ऑन समथिंग दैट इज बेसिक. अगर कॉम्प्लेक्स क्वेश्चन नहीं हो रहा है, अगर आपको नहीं पता किसी गवर्नमेंट स्कीम के बारे में कि कौन सी मिनिस्ट्री चला रही थी, इफ you know miss out on those kind of questions is still acceptable. But if you miss out on such basic questions कि कौन सा ocean current warm current है, कौन सा cold current है, तो फिर आप you're doing blunders. So that is there. Okay, now let's draw the timeline. And देखिए, in 1911 the partition of Bengal was annulled, and this partition of Bengal was annulled primarily because of 2 or 3 reasons. One of the reasons was of the constant nuisance that the militant nationalists were causing. The militant nationalists, I'm saying, were causing a constant nuisance. The militant nationalists could not overthrow the British. There was no chance that the militant nationalists could overthrow the British because they didn't have the muscle power or the access to arms and ammunition. But they were a constant source of nuisance and fear, okay, amongst the masses, and this was disrupting economic activities also in many areas. So that was one reason. The second reason was that they understood that this became a constant ploy. Now the partition of Bengal that the British had done was not facing any mass resistance, and the British could have continued with the partition of Bengal. But it became a symbolic act of how the British were totally unresponsive to the needs and wishes of the people. That the British did not care at all. Now this would become a lasting memory that would often be invoked against the British. British realized that the Congress had been successful not in, repealing the partition of Bengal, but had been successful in making it a visible symbol of British atrocities against India. So to address this kind of, concern, ki, even the future generation looks at partition of Bengal and say that this was what the British did, and invokes further rebellion against the British. So to do away with all such possibilities, the British repealed the partition of Bengal in 1911. And when the British repealed the partition of Bengal in 1911, those who supported it were very angry. And this was the Muslim League. So the partition was annulled. In 1911, this is a key date to remember. Okay, the next important thing that we need to know is that after partition, देखिए in 1914, two important things happened. One was that World War I was about to start, and second was Tilak was released from jail. So in 1914, Tilak was released from jail and World War I started. The impact of World War I we'll discuss separately, but Tilak's release from jail has got nothing to do with World War I, but it just both happened during the same time. Okay, so Tilak was released from jail, and when Tilak was released from jail, he actively sought to bring about a rapprochement between the moderates and the extremists. And Tilak, when released from jail, himself became more moderate, in the sense that he gave a written assurance to the British that he will not give any such call for a direct overthrow of British or anything. At the same point of time, he also wanted to pacify the moderate leaders that a rapprochement was possible. The moderate leaders also were of the opinion that, listen, we have not been able to do anything for the past 8 or 10 years anyways. So they were also looking for some sort of a rapprochement with Tilak. And the crucial role here that was played by Annie Besant. Now Annie Besant was to play a crucial role in the reunification of Congress that was to happen in 1916 with the Lucknow session of the Congress. Also, Annie Besant played a crucial role in the formation of the Home Rule Leagues. Now, wherever these Home Rule Leagues formed, we will see that the Home Rule Leagues were formed primarily in response to the World War I. Also, so they primarily in response to World War I, and at the same point of time, these Home Rule Leagues were inspired by the Irish Home Rule Leagues. Now, Annie Besant herself, She was an Irish national, and she came to India in 1890s, okay, and she was a part of the Theosophical movement. But the Theosophical movement was not started by Annie Besant. She was a part of it. Okay. Now you remember I had marked, we had marked, and I told you that Alcott and Blavatsky were responsible for the Theosophical movement. But even she started the Home Rule Leagues along with Tilak. Annie Besant, along with Tilak, started the Home Rule League movements inspired by the Irish Home Rule Leagues. Now, after this, Annie Besant played a crucial role in bringing Congress and the moderates and the extremists together in the Lucknow session of the Congress, which witnessed a reunification of Congress. But at the same point of time, the Lucknow session was also important because it was the marking of informal alliance or an agreement between the Congress and the Muslim League. Okay. Now, this is something that we'll look into, why this informal alliance between the Congress and the Muslim League happened in 1916. Why all of this happened, we'll look into this. Now, let me explain to you something before, because that is important to understand what happened after this. Otherwise, you'll not understand at all. And that is that in World War I, हम अलग से भी World War I की बात करेंगे, लेकिन for now, in World War I, basically, we're not discussing World War I, but to understand what is going to happen next. In World War I, Britain, France were on one side. Germany, the Ottoman Empire, were on the other side. There were other players also, but for our simplicity, for now, we understand it as this way. Now, the Ottoman Empire then was, the Ottoman Empire, what you see today as Turkey. Okay, so the Turkey was in many ways, or the Turkish rulers were in many ways the important rulers of the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire then had Turkey and importantly Constantinople, but yeah, Turkey at its important, center of rule. But Ottoman Empire extended almost all from Eastern Europe to Iran. So it was extending through the whole Gulf region, whether you see Syria, Jordan, or Saudi Arabia, or Yemen, all of that, including Turkey, everything was a part of the Ottoman Empire. So the Ottoman Empire was a large empire which spanned almost through whole of West Asia. Okay, but this was before World War I. Now in World War I, Ottoman Empire supported the Germans. But as now, why this war happened and all, I'm not discussing. But nonetheless, and yeah, Britain, France, and also Russia were on the one side. But in spite of the Ottoman Empire was a huge empire, but Germany and Ottoman Empire suffered a defeat in World War I. Now, when Germany and more importantly also the Ottoman Empire suffered a defeat in World War I, the ruler or the Khalifa of the Ottoman Empire was also in charge of the most important sacred places of Muslims, and these were Makkah and Medina. And so these were the important sacred places of Muslims that the Ottoman Empire ka ruler, the Khalifa, was in charge of. But after Ottoman Empire was defeated, the British and the French decided to, I don't have a map, but why I'm telling you this is because इससे काफ़ी सारी चीज़ें actually में समझ में आ जाती हैं एक बार में. But if you see the map, okay, one of the things that you will find is that the whole of West Asia was sought to be divided into two parts, which were to be under the indirect spheres of influence or control of the British and the French. So, जो आपका Syria और Iraq वाला portion है, okay, half of Syria and adjoining part of Iraq and adjoining part of Syria, that was to come under the control of the British, whereas the western part of Syria and Turkey, etc., and including that was to come under the control of French. So this is what you see in history, in world history, the Sykes-Picot Agreement. ओके तो ये सब तो आप वर्ल्ड हिस्ट्री में पढ़ेंगे, लेकिन दिस वाज द साइक्स-पिकॉट एग्रीमेंट. व्हाई आई एम टेलिंग यू दिस, आपको ये साइक्स-पिकॉट याद रखने की जरूरत नहीं है. दैट आफ्टर द ऑटोमन एम्पायर वाज डिफीटेड, द ब्रिटिश एंड द फ्रेंच decided to divide the Ottoman Empire into their indirect zones of influence. So one of the important concerns that was there of the Muslims at this point of time, Muslim religious leaders primarily at this point of time throughout the world, was that what will happen to the important religious places? Will they be continue to be under the control of the Khalifa, whom the Muslim also considered their religious leader? Okay, so they wanted that the important religious places should continue to be under the control of the Khalifa, and the Khalifa should be left with enough territory around the Makkah and Medina so that all the Muslim shrines are under his control. And that is what their demand also was to the British. But the British did not pay any heed to this demand, and they went ahead with this decision to partition the Ottoman Empire between the French and the British in this manner. So this was the demand of a number of Muslim religious leaders throughout the world, that the Khalifa should be left, should not be touched, and his princely privileges around Muslim shrines should be allowed to remain in the very first place. And it was this demand that the British did not listen to. And primarily against this partition of Turkey or the Ottoman Empire, which was actually going to remove the Khalifa, the important leaders also launched the Khilafat movement. The Khilafat movement was launched primarily by Muhammad Ali and Shaukat Ali in 1917. And when this call for Khilafat movement was given by Muhammad Ali and Shaukat Ali, at this point of time, Congress under Gandhi also joined the Khilafat movement and joined hands with Muhammad Ali and Shaukat Ali. So the Khilafat movement was one issue which brought the Congress and the Khilafat and Muhammad Ali and Shaukat Ali together. And this was an opportunity that, Gandhi was looking. So as to make a point that Congress was not an organization which did not look after Muslim interests, and the Khilafat issue, which was primarily only a Muslim issue, was also sought to be picked up by the Congress to prove its credentials, that it was not an organization only looking after only looking after Hindu interests. So that is when the Khilafat movement started. There are other things also that we'll talk about. Okay, I have suddenly introduced Gandhi in the scene, but I have not talked to you about Gandhi's period in Africa and all these things. We'll talk about that. Okay, आप इधर ही 1917 में you can also write adjacent to 1917 the arrival of Gandhi on India's political scene, and in 1917 you can also write Kheda, Champaran. All of these were important, and the Ahmedabad mill strike. So the Kheda Satyagraha, the Champaran Satyagraha, and the Ahmedabad mill strike, all of them also roughly happened at the same time and are associated with the arrival of Gandhi. We'll see details of all three of them because they're important from prelims point of view separately also. Now, if this much is done, then in 1918, देखिए, now this is a very closely, dense period that we have to see in greater detail. That in 1918, the government promised that the government had promised in 1909 itself that from now on, every 10 years, we will send a committee which will look into further devolution of powers. So after 1907, the next committee was sent in 1918. And its recommendations were to be implemented in 1919. And these were the Montagu-Chelmsford reforms. So the Montagu-Chelmsford committee, which gave the 1919 Government of India Act that came into existence. हमारे prelims के लिए the important details of Montagu-Chelmsford reforms और ये मैं बता रहा हूँ. In fact, I personally feel of all the reforms that we've discussed, the highest likelihood of questions coming from is from the Montagu-Chelmsford reforms. Why? Because it was a very complex structure which was introduced, and there were certain key characteristics जो हमें पता होने चाहिए. So we'll talk about this later. But the Montagu-Chelmsford reforms were introduced in 1919. As I told you that the Montagu-Chelmsford reforms were a form of carrot. The stick was Rowlatt Act. Basically, the Rowlatt Act did away with the provision of habeas corpus, that an individual could be imprisoned by the police without even conducting a trial. Okay, and the police could imprison an individual also, need not present him before the court also. So imprisonment could be done without a trial, without being informed of the grounds of arrest. So the police could basically have a reign of terror, right? So in that sense, the Rowlatt Act was an act which was meant to provide repression of the masses. And this was also introduced in 1919. Okay. Now, once the Montagu-Chelmsford reforms were introduced, we again find the same dissatisfaction, that Congress was extremely dissatisfied with the Montagu-Chelmsford reforms as well. So Congress on the one side were dissatisfied with the Montagu-Chelmsford reforms. On the other hand, the Congress was, and in fact no Indian within the Legislative Council supported the Rowlatt Act. In fact, all of them unanimously opposed the Rowlatt Act. All Indians within the Legislative Council opposed the Rowlatt Act because it was seen as an act of British repression and meant to curb any dissent. So they opposed the Rowlatt Act. At the same point of time in 1919, in one of the popular meetings that was organized to oppose the Rowlatt Act, and when the martial law which prohibited mass meetings was in operation in Punjab at that point of time, in Amritsar a meeting was organized by Saifuddin Khichlu and others, and it was in one of these mass meetings that was organized in Amritsar that the British fired upon unarmed gathering of more than 1,000 people, and an unarmed gathering of thousands of people, in which more than 1,000 people were killed. And so this was known as the Jallianwala Bagh massacre. In protest against the Jallianwala Bagh massacre, there were a number of important political activity in India, where there were mass protests also. At the same point of time, the Congress realized the significance of this act. Yeah, there's a doubt? Yeah, tell me. Saifuddin Khichlu. Kitchlew. Okay. So if you have a doubt, you can ask me within the timeline also. Okay. Yeah. So in terms of the Jallianwala Bagh massacre, this was something that came as a huge insult to Indians. The Congress was to use this opportunity to point out to Indians that such a mass atrocity where unarmed public gathering could be fired upon, in which more than 1,000 people have been killed, could happen only in India. Primarily because we were a colony. No government could carry out such an unspoken atrocity without fearing the consequences, unless if at all it was accountable to the people. So to that extent, the Jallianwala Bagh massacre was something that galvanized anti-British protests within India. So all of these reasons, the dissatisfaction of the Congress with the Montagu-Chelmsford reforms, their opposition to the Rowlatt Act, and the Jallianwala Bagh massacre, all of these reasons were responsible why in Congress in 1920 decided to go ahead with the non-cooperation movement. Okay. Now, they decided to go ahead with non-cooperation movement, though this was launched in 1921. Okay. And the 1920 ka session was the Nagpur session of the Congress. This Nagpur session of the Congress is extremely important from our prelims point of view again. Okay, that what happened in the Nagpur session of the Congress, some details of the Nagpur session of Congress was something that happened at this point of time, the Nagpur session of the Congress, in which the formal proclamation for the launch of the non-cooperation movement was given. 1906 में Swaraj was given, 1920 the proclamation for non-cooperation movement was to be given from the Nagpur session onwards. 1920 में also they decided that now Swaraj could be attained by using extra constitutional also. Meaning Swaraj was now to be attained by use of extra constitutional means. What are these extra constitutional means? Is mass protest. That non-cooperation movement, Nagpur session, Swaraj, extra constitutional means. Okay, just write down these 4 words. 1920 non-cooperation movement, Nagpur session, call for Swaraj to be attained by extra constitutional means. Okay. Huh? C.R. Das. Name is not that important, but yeah, C.R. Das headed the session. Okay. Now, is with this much, in 1921, non-cooperation movement was initiated, and after this, it was terminated after the Chauri Chaura incident. Now, what was the Chauri Chaura incident? We will see all of this later. Okay. And why was the movement suspended? Also, we'll see. Chauri Chaura movement was one of the, Chauri Chaura incidents was one of the reasons, but there were other reasons also. Chauri, Chaura, Chauri Chaura incident. Okay. Is it visible? It's not visible? This portion is not visible? Okay. I'll just dictate it to you. 1920 was a non-cooperation movement. 1920 was a non-cooperation movement. उसके बाद non-cooperation movement का resolution was passed in 1920. 1921 it was initiated, and it stopped after the Chauri Chaura incident that happened in UP in 1921-22. Okay, nothing else is written. Chauri Chaura, that's it. It happened in 1922 to be more precise, but that's it. Just you need to write that much is enough. Has everybody written from the back? Written? You people have written here? Okay. So you just need to draw this much. Then we'll come to the details, because I've not talked about World War I and its impact on home rule leagues and all. अब इसमें mains के according देखिए prelims के लिए what is important is almost everything from here. For example, about the Lucknow session, why the Lucknow session happened, what was the significance of the Lucknow session is important. What was the Khilafat movement about, on which issue the Khilafat movement was launched, this is important for the prelims. Then obviously the details of the Montagu-Chelmsford reforms are important from the prelims. Also, what was the Rowlatt Act about, सब पे question आया हुआ है पहले prelims में. There has been a question on Rowlatt movement also. Almost all of these things पे questions आए हुए हैं. So what was the Rowlatt Act about also has to be understood. Also in Jallianwala Bagh massacre, आप इसके आगे एक चीज और लिख लीजिए, हंटर कमीशन. जलियांवाला बाग मज़ाकर के आगे बस एक हंटर कमीशन लिख लीजिए. या विल टॉक अबाउट दैट. सो जलियांवाला बाग मज़ाकर के आगे जस्ट यू राइट हंटर, HUNTER, हंटर कमीशन रिपोर्ट. ओके, सो ऑल ऑफ दिस एंड द नागपुर सेशन ऑफ द कांग्रेस, ये भी प्रीलिम्स के लिए इंपॉर्टेंट है. ये सारी चीजें प्रीलिम्स के लिए इंपॉर्टेंट है. नाउ व्हेन इन टर्म्स ऑफ द मेंस व्हाट इज इंपॉर्टेंट आर सर्टेन थिंग्स विथ रिस्पेक्ट टू जो यहाँ पे नहीं लिखा है अभी तक मैंने, एंड दैट इज फॉर एग्जाम्पल अबाउट द अराइवल ऑफ गांधी. देखिए ठीक है, आप लोग नॉर्मली जब पढ़ते हैं, सो वेन एवर यू टॉक अबाउट गांधी, यू टॉक अबाउट गांधी इन द इंडिपेंडेंस स्ट्रगल, बट गांधी's role and Gandhi's experiences before arrival in India, primarily in Africa, is something that you do not talk about. But that is important from the mains point of view, though a question has never come from Gandhi's and what was the contribution of Gandhian struggle in the or in the era from in the era preceding 1917, it is extremely important to understand, because the Gandhian experiences and struggles during South Africa were the ones which allowed Gandhi to become an important player in the freedom struggle in India. When Gandhi came to India, Gandhi came to India only 1915, 1916. By 1917, he was almost a very important member of the Congress. By 1917, he is negotiating on the parts of Congress with the Muslim League and others. ऐसा कैसे? गांधी किसी और का बच्चा तो नहीं था, right? So Gandhi could become so important to the freedom struggle and so popular, both within the Congress also, primarily because of the successes he registered in Africa. Okay, and also Gandhi developed his political ideas and political strategies with his struggle in Africa. So that is why आपके mains में ये question आ सकता है. And in fact, Ramchandra Guha has written another book. Not India after Gandhi, तो is India after Gandhi. वो तो after हुआ ना. Gandhi before India. He's working on a 3-volume project. 1 volume has been released. That is on what was Gandhi's life before he came to India, because his political ideas and strategies were developed at this point of time. So mains में ये question आ सकता है that what was the impact of Gandhi's struggle in Africa on the Indian freedom struggle? Okay, so जैसे ये आजकल जो आपके काउंटर फैक्चुअल क्वेश्चन आते हैं ना कि ये नहीं होता तो क्या होता, so if Gandhi would never have gone to Africa, a number of things in terms of development of political ideas and strategies on Gandhian part would never have happened. For example, जिसमें बहुत सारी चीजें हैं जैसे Tolstoy farm etc. There are many things, so we will talk about that as well, जो means के लिए important है लेकिन unlikely to come in the prelims. Okay, now also apart from this, what is important from the mains point of view is the orientation of or the contribution or the significance of the non-cooperation movement itself. तो वो भी एक something है that is important from the mains point of view. Okay, so apart from it there are other things also that but we'll talk about. एक important question also जो mains के लिए बनता है यहाँ से, जो तीसरा एक important question बनता है, and that is about the impact of key international events on the Indian freedom struggle. तो key international events में जो Indian freedom struggle पे जिनका हम देखेंगे impact, that is for example World War I, the Khilafat question. Yes, so we'll see World War I का impact था कि भाई Ghadar movement was also there. Okay, that was there. Also the Khilafat question was there. Also जब हम key international events की बात करते हैं तो it's not just World War I, but it is also the Russian Revolution that we'll see in 1920s inspired a number of left revolutionaries both within the Congress, outside the Congress also, and also World War II later. So इन सब के बारे में आपको आंसर में बात करनी होगी, but World War I is also one of them. So we'll talk about that as well. उसके अलावा प्रीलिम्स में एक दो चीज़ें और हैं जो आप जिसके बारे में हम बात करेंगे, दैट इज़ द गदर पार्टी, द जिमरमैन प्लान, एंड ये सब वर्ल्ड वॉर 1 के टाइम ही हो रहा था. गदर पार्टी, जिमरमैन प्लान, एंड okay, so that much is also something that we'll talk about from the prelims perspective. Now देखिए जब वर्ल्ड वॉर 1 हुई, now let's discuss this further. I'll give you a break after 10 minutes. So okay, we'll take a break now. Okay, and so that after the break we can continue. Or now that the average temperature has increased, तो आप सब as close to 9 as possible आने की कोशिश. So देखिए de facto time had become 9:15, right? Now it has to be restored back to 9. So come quickly for the next class. We'll have a 15 minutes break. 15 minutes break, and then we can resume. So tomorrow is the Republic Day, right? It's not a holiday, it's a Republic Day, right? तो सकते हैं. Settle down. Now, tomorrow for the Republic Day thing, the UAE, the chief guest is from UAE, right? So whatever is the name is not important for us anyways. So Now, why I'm basically taking 2 minutes. Okay, so whichever way you understand, should I say a sign language that you should, please, silence now. Now, there have been repeated questions in the past 2 or 3 years on South Asia as a region in your paper 2, IR. Okay, and in the past 2 years, at least from what I remember, from the past 2 years, there has been no question from West Asia. Okay, and this is a year they get a direct question from Syria or from the Syrian conflict or from that situation is unlikely to come in your exam. Okay, a question but involving West Asia is very much likely to come. This year there was a question, I think this year there was a question on Look East policy. Okay, there's always last in the past 2 years, 2 or 3 years, there have been repeated questions on South Asia. India's South Asian foreign policy, the Gujarat doctrine of foreign policy, etc. In सारी चीज़ों पे पिछले 2-3 साल में questions आए, लेकिन in the past 2-3 years, there have been no questions on India's Look West policy. So India की बहुत सारी policies हैं IR में. There's a Look East policy for its East Asian neighbors, as well as Eastern neighbors. There's a Look West policy for West Asian neighbors. There's a Connect Central Asia policy for Central Asian countries. ये सारी इंडिया की official doctrines हैं on foreign policies. So in the current context, what I'm saying so is West Asia say there is a likelihood of a good question coming this year in your mains examination. There's a very strong likelihood. Primarily also because of this reason that the chief guest is also from one of the West Asian countries, that is UAE, right? So in that context, what the focus is unlikely, the question is unlikely to be on any one of the countries such as India, Saudi Arabia. There was a question in 2011 on India-Saudi Arabia relations also, but it can be a possibility that question may not be on individual country relations between India and specific West Asian countries, but in the context of the whole Look West policy of India. For example, what are Indian concerns in West Asia that you should be, for example, with respect to the huge remittances that flow in from this region. On top of that, the fact that more than 7 or 8 million workers work there. So any conflict in West Asia which leads to political instability can have a direct impact in the situation that if we have to rescue our workers from there, it's going to be a mammoth task to do so. So also apart from not just remittances and also the involvement of huge number of immigrants, also is the point of involvement of India's oil security, which is, or energy security, which is critically reliant upon imports from the Gulf Cooperation countries, the GCC countries, okay, and also from Iran. So Iran is not a member of the GCC. GCC क्या है ये आपको पता होना चाहिए, ये prelims में भी आ सकता है. GCC, the Gulf Cooperation Council, is a bunch of oil exporting countries which are predominantly Sunni. Iran is out of it because it is Shia, and GCC was formed actually in competition to Iran at that point of time. But why I'm saying so is also because these areas and relations with these areas very important from energy security point of view for India also. And lastly, as in the case of UAE, we had long ago, some 4 or 5 years ago, had formed the India UAE Investment Fund, and to the tune of $75 billion. So in the sense that UAE has the biggest amount of foreign reserves that it can use to strategically invest in any economy. So India is also looking to attract whatever funds that it can attract in infrastructural investment from UAE itself also. So जो basic 4 or 5 areas of concerns हैं with respect to Look West policy, that is, देखिए, if you know what are the 4 or 5 major concerns with Look West policy, even if you don't know about every specific country, you can write about every specific country on these dimensions. Last, one of the 6 dimensions also is the cooperation on counter-terrorism. Okay, security, counter-terrorism, as well as safety of sea routes because of piracy threats along the Horn of Africa and all these things. So ये 5 या 6 dimension है. If you know these, you can write any answer on even specific countries of West Asia or West Asia as a region. And there is a good likelihood that this year there can be a question in your paper 2 specifically on West Asia. अब आप लोग शांत हो गए तो हम चालू हो जाते हैं. So in the sense that okay, some of the students came to me in the break and they said that, sir, please you go with the pace that you were going in the start. So okay, yeah, so the students who said this to me in the break as well. So Yes, it isn't that I've explained 1914 to 21 right now. I've just given a broad timeline. We'll discuss this, and yes, if there is, see, even if you feel, in the middle of the class, just like she did, if you feel that this is still going fast, you can also, I can repeat that also, okay? So this is a total democracy in that sense. You can just raise your hand and I'll listen to you, okay? Whatever is your concern. So don't harbor any apprehension that we'll go too fast or anything of that sort, okay? Now, so after the annulment of partition, the next important thing is the World War I, and then, so that is first thing that we'll see. Okay, in World War I, at the time of initiation of World War I, one of the things that you have to understand is also, जो मैं actually मैं यहाँ directly नहीं कराऊंगा, okay, and that is the contribution. ये question तो आया नहीं है कभी, लेकिन in 2014 we celebrated also in the sense that India celebrated the contribution of Indian soldiers in World War I. In 2014, because it was the 100th anniversary of World War I. Okay, why I'm pointing out this is that the Indian soldiers in the British Indian Army were one of the biggest fighting contingents on the behalf of British. Not just because the war didn't reach India, but the war was very crucially being played out in West Asia, Europe, as well as North Africa. So in all these countries, on the behalf of the British Indian Army was also fighting the wars. So why am I pointing out this is because you have to understand that in World War I, a crucial role was played by the British Indian Army also in the very first place. Now, at this point of time, the nationalists were dealing with this question. Should they support the British in World War I? Because obviously the Indians were not anywhere involved in the war itself directly, right? Their no direct interest was involved in the war. So should Indians support the British participation in World War I? Now why, or should they not? Now why was Indian support crucial was primarily because this was a war in which the British Indian Army was going to play a role for an important role for the British. So if at all the Congress gave a call ki Indians should not participate in the war because it is not a war of their interest, or Indian soldiers within the British Army should not participate in the war, then that was likely to lead to a situation where there could be either a rebellion within the army or the cohesiveness of the army as a unit actually underwent a decline. And this is the time when the Britishers needed the British Indian Army the most. Not to defend their interests in South Asia, but primarily in Europe, North Africa and West Asia. Okay, so the support of the Indian Army was crucial. And to an extent, the Congress understood this fact. But at the same point of time, the Congress, and there were three shades of opinion at this point of time. There was one shade of opinion within the Congress, for example, the moderates. The moderates were of the opinion that in 1914 also was the year when Tilak was released. Okay, so Tilak was released from jail in 1914. And in 1914, the moderates, or those who were the moderates of the Congress, they were of the opinion that they should support the British at this point of time because it was their constitutional duty also to do so. I mean, they could never ask for instigating a rebellion within the army. And second, they also felt that the British will devolve more powers as in exchange for the loyalty that Indians show at this crucial time that the British need the support of the Indian army. So the moderates were expecting that the British will reply back with a positive gesture once the war is over. Tilak was of the opinion, Tilak, when he was released from the jail, Tilak was also of the opinion that at this point of time we should extend support to the British government, but in return the British should also promise us that substantial devolution of power will happen in favor of India once the war is over. There was a third line of opinion which was different from that of moderates and extremists, and that was of the militant nationalists. They said that the British today are fighting a war at many fronts in Europe, in Africa, in West Asia, etc. So they're already stretched. Okay, I mean, they're fighting too many battles in too many areas, and this is the right time that we should instigate a rebellion within the Indian army. And if at all there's a rebellion within the Indian army, then the British will not be able to contain this rebellion because they're already fighting so many wars on so many other fronts. So this is the time when the British are weak, and we should strike at the time when the British are weak, and this is that moment. So we should capitalize on this moment, we should instigate a rebellion within the British Indian army, and then we can overthrow the British with much ease at this point of time. So this was the third opinion. Okay, so the moderates supported the empire as a matter of duty. The extremists, including Tilak, supported the British in belief that the British would repay Indian loyalty after that by resorting to a significant devolution of power after the war is over. And the revolutionary terrorists or the militant nationalists decided to utilize the opportunity to wage a war on British rule in India, because in their opinion this was the right time, because the British forces were already preoccupied with many wars at this point of time. And so this was one of the important reasons for the Ghadar movement, and we'll see the Ghadar movement in greater detail. But the Ghadar movement was primarily launched at this point of time with the understanding that the Ghadar party wanted to instigate a rebellion within the British Indian Army. Okay, and that was already their plan. But on top of that, there was something of the name of Komatagaru incident that happened. Now, in 2016 only, Trudeau, gave this apology, and in 2014 also was the 100th anniversary of the Komatagaru incident. Now today the Sikh community is a very important and powerful community within Canada, right? So the Komatagaru incident basically involved a number of Indian migrants, and most of these migrants were the Sikh population from Punjab. Now देखिए, what was the Komatagaru incident? बहुत ज़्यादा डिटेल में जाने की ज़रूरत नहीं है, लेकिन very briefly I'm telling you. It's not written here, but I'm just briefly telling you. Though it's written in your books. Okay. देखिए, the Komatagaru incident was there primarily because back then in Canada, the government there had, under the pressure from British, had started imposing new laws and limitations on migration of non-white individuals to Canada. Okay, so one of this restriction was that individuals, had to travel after buying the ticket directly to Canada, and that whole travel, the sea travel, should happen without any interruptions, meaning without porting at any other port. Okay, so ऐसा नहीं है कि the journey was to start from Singapore, then beach में it was to stop somewhere in Europe and then go to Canada. No, it could not happen. If that had to happen, then that they would not be allowed to migrate. Okay, so one of the conditions that was imposed was one-way ticket should be there without any interruption. So the journey had to start from Singapore, and without any interruptions had to go all the way to Canada. Even if you take a flight today, all the flights to Canada or to United States stop for refueling purposes and also for a period of break between in Europe, somewhere in Frankfurt or somewhere, right? Because even a direct flight journey to United States from Delhi is 16 hours, non-stop. So the San Francisco flight is for 16 hours. So 16 hours is when you're going by flight. If you go by ship, it will take many months. Okay, right? So in that context, these limitations were imposed knowing full well that they will be very difficult to fulfill in the first place, and these were regulations on the face, were introduced to regulate immigration, but were deliberately meant to keep the non-whites out of Canada. Okay, so that is why if you actually go and read this, you will see that here he is talking about the immigration policy. So basically, the Komatagaru incident was precipitated by the immigration policy of the Canadian government at this point of time. Now what happened in this incident was, there were a number of Indian migrants who came from Calcutta. Then from Calcutta they went firstly to Singapore. From Singapore they boarded the convoy for Canada. So this was to be non-stop flight. But when they landed in Canada, almost out of these passengers, except for 3 or 4 passengers, all of them were denied the right to deboard in Canada, because number of them were lacking certain official documents. So the Canadian government did not allow them to deboard, and they were forced to live on the ship for the next few days, and that actually went on for a couple of months. Okay, so even after reaching Canada, they could not deboard in Canada because some of them because they were lacking certain official documents. And then the Canadian government, rather than allowing them to deboard, sent the ship back, and this ship was sent back to Calcutta. Now, when the ship reached Calcutta, a number of these migrants refused to deboard, saying that they wanted to go to Canada. They'd done all the formalities, and because of certain minor procedural irregularities, they've been forced back here and they want to go back to Canada. And at this point of time, they were forced to deboard, and because of the violence that happened, and the British lathi charged as well as fired on the ship, in the sense that resulted in more than 40 or 50 individuals actually died in this incident. Now the British, so this was an issue of immigration which snowballed into an issue which involved a majority of population from the Punjabi Sikh community, and this precipitated the crisis in the sense that when the Komotagaru incident happened, the Congress again, at that point of time, the Congress also, utilized to point out that this atrocity would have never happened if the Indians would have had control of the government in the first place. But at the same point of time, the Komotagaru incident was also used by the Ghadar party to instigate the rebellion within the British Indian Army, especially amongst those stationed in Punjab. Okay, so this was something that affected the Punjabi community or people from the Punjabi community at that point of time, more than any other part of the country. And the Ghadar party tried to capitalize upon this. Now the Ghadar party was formed by Lala Hardayal and Sohan Singh. Also, Barkatullah was also an important part of the initial founders of. हाँ वही जो लिखा है वही है, जैसे भी आप बुलाना चाह नहीं जो ट्रूडो ने लिखा है वही सही होगा ना यार. Whatever is the spelling mistake, if at all, ये है जो ट्रूडो ने लिखा है वही सही होगा, मैंने लिखा है वो तो गलत ही होगा, ऑब्वियस सी बात है. In the sense that whatever is the spelling mistake, that was the incident all about. Now the importance, there's unlikely to be a question directly on the incident itself, but the significance of the incident is that it became a tipping point. That the Ghadar party was formed in San Francisco in United States, and the Ghadar party was formed primarily by Lala Hardayal. Lala Hardayal himself was a professor. Okay, he was a professor who capitalized on this idea. His understanding was that we should launch an armed rebellion and a mutiny within the British Indian Army, both within India and those stationed abroad also. Okay, by this time the United States had not joined the war, and so they formed their political organization in San Francisco, because if they would have formed this organization in India, obviously the government would have cracked down on it, right? So they had formed this organization in San Francisco in United States. By then US had not joined the movement, and US had not joined the war, and US joined the war pretty late. So they were the ones who were writing articles also, and also were trying to establish contact with Indian militant nationalists within India to carry out a mutiny. So then they conceived of a plan, and even when they were conceiving of this plan, the Komotagaru incident happened. When this incident happened, the Ghadar party said, now is the time when we should instigate the rebellion. So they contacted Rash Bihari Ghosh, through Rash Bihari Ghosh and others, they planned this, that they will launch a mutiny like the kind of 1857 mutiny specifically within Punjab, starting with Punjab itself, because Hardayal and others also came from Punjab, and this incident gave them enough reason for instigating the rebellion there. Though they had planned this, but even before this could be implemented, the British came to know about this planned conspiracy, and they cracked down. By then the United States had also joined the war. Okay, and when United States joined the war, it cracked down on the Ghadar party in San Francisco, because US had joined the war on the side of British. Okay, so because US was supporting British, so obviously any anti-British activity starting from US was sought to be curbed by the British. Okay, so basically what happened was that The Ghadar party was cracked down in US also, and their attempt at instigating a rebellion within India failed even before it could have started. So, in many ways, what the Ghadar party wanted to do was to instigate a rebellion, but this never happened. And Ghadar party failed to achieve its immediate objective. Now, the Ghadar party failed to achieve its immediate objective because of certain reasons. The first important reason was that people like Lala Hardayal had no expertise in areas of military operations. So their organizational ability was poor. Hardayal was a very prolific speaker, but he was not a person who had any first-hand experience before this time in organizing a military coup or anything of this sort. The second thing was that, and so this was one of the major reasons why the Ghadar party failed in achieving its immediate objective. लेकिन अगर आपको कभी भी key international or if you have to write about the Ghadar party also, the positive aspect of the Ghadar party was that the Ghadar party was formed by Hardayal, Sohan Singh Bakna, Maulana Barkatullah, etc. All these people, Barkatullah and Hardayal, these were the people who were the prime movers of the revolt, and they preached nationalism with a completely secular outlook. So this was a militant activity which was not with any religious ideas, etc. And to that extent, this was a very secular initiative. But yes, at the same point of time, they failed to achieve their immediate objectives. Now, when the US government cracked down on the Ghadar party, Lala Hardayal escaped from United States and he went to Germany. देखिए, सीधी सी बात है, जो आपका दुश्मन और हमारा दुश्मन, तो हम दोस्त. For example, Japan and India today both are looking at the threat of Chinese aggression, and that is why also you see from the time of Manmohan Singh only, from the second term of Manmohan Singh, from the time of 2008 itself, that Japan has been closely moving towards a stronger cooperation with India, right? So, or you see the US pivot. So the US-India nuclear deal also was primarily because of the fact that the US had decided to move in a closer cooperation with India, primarily also because of the fact of in the effort to tackle the Chinese. So many also are looking with expectation towards the Trump government, hoping that nobody knows what it's going to do, but hoping that something positive in India-US relations, specifically with the aim of containing China, will come around. Right? Even when we also have many other issues to settle with US in the very first place. But nonetheless. So in this context, when Germany was the one who were fighting the war, so Lala Hardayal now, after escaping from United States, when United States joined the war on the side of Britain, now went to Germany, and after reaching Germany, what they did was that he contacted the German Foreign Office. The German Foreign Office said, okay, we'll give all the assistance that you need. Okay, you can try and instigate a rebellion within the Indian army. The idea was same. Now he looked to the Germans for help. And this was called as the Zimmermann plan. So what was, तो आपके prelims में जो आ सकता है, then the only thing that what was the aim of, or what was Ghadar party and the Zimmermann plan trying to achieve? They were trying to instigate a mutiny within the Indian army. But even the Zimmermann plan did not succeed because, again, even before they could do any of this sort, the government knew of the intentions because they now were tracking the movements of Hardayal very closely at this point of time. So they knew that now that he had gone to Germany, he would be planning a similar exercise there as well. The Zimmermann plan also aimed to instigate the revolt in the British Indian army itself. But the Zimmermann plan, Yeah, so the Ghadar party had already failed in India, and the Zimmermann plan was also trying to execute the same strategy. Okay, but because that was Hardayal's plan, that is what he wanted to do. But like he failed in case of in San Francisco with the Gadar, the Zimmermann plan also did not achieve anything significant. Okay, it could not materialize only in the very first place. Okay, so that was there. But क्योंकि ये दिया हुआ है आपकी books में, that is why I also told about this as well. So that is what the Gadar movement was primarily about. So unlikely that there will be a separate question specifically on the Gadar movement or also on the Zimmermann plan, but their context is important, that this was a key response to World War I. Okay, so on the World War I side, we will see that what were the Indian militant nationalists trying to do? What they were trying to capitalize upon World War I. And their attempt was with the Gadar movement, even if it did not succeed. Okay, you cannot look only at those aspects of history which succeeded and discard those which didn't succeed. Then, तो फिर हमको बस Quit India movement के बारे में बात करनी चाहिए. And, right? So that is why you cannot discard those events which did not succeed also. So the contribution of Gadar party was that it preached militant nationalism with a completely secular approach, and the Kommatagaru incident and the outbreak of World War I further strengthened their intentions in 1914. Also, it intended, and the strategy was that it intended to provoke a mutiny amongst Indian soldiers stationed in India and abroad. However, when the government, and the name of the act is not important, but when the government found out about the intentions, it introduced a new act, and that was the Defense of India Act. And with this act, it actually gave wide powers to the government. They captured a number of soldiers also who were planning the mutiny, and they were imprisoned without trials. There were strict restrictions that were imposed on the freedom of speech, expression, and also, so a form of martial law was imposed when World War I was in operation. Now, the Zimmermann plan is also something that I've already told you. Thoda tha break, right? In the sense that these are some of the questions which have appeared in the past 4 or 5 years. I'll also bring in the questions from 2016 also that I have not put in the PPT, but we'll discuss those questions also in the class itself. So you can calmly go through the question, and then there is some amount of wisdom that I'll want to throw it to you, not through the questions, but how the questions are framed from them. Okay. So how many think that the first statement is correct? First statement is correct, right? So if at all in the possibility that, suppose you knew that the first statement was not correct, you 101% if at all, देखिए क्वेश्चन कुछ और है, ऑप्शन नीचे वही है. If at all you knew that the first option was not correct, then the answer is there even if you don't know second and third. Okay. Why I'm saying this is because of 2 reasons. It is, if you are, suppose, why I'm telling you this is, suppose there is a question in which you are not sure about the first option, whether it is correct or incorrect. Okay. अगर आपको नहीं पता है कि फर्स्ट ऑप्शन करेक्ट है या इनकरेक्ट है, यू आर अ बिट डाइसी, एंड यू सी 4 out of the 3 options has one as a correct option, then in all likelihood the first statement is correct. अगर आपको श्योरली पता ही है तो बात अलग है, but if you're not sure, why I'm telling you this is because apart from the 40 or 50 questions that you will surely know, there will be another 50 questions where you should apply your mind. There is no valor in finishing the exam half an hour before or 40 minutes before. कि यार क्या है 100 क्वेश्चन थे मैंने तो कर लिया, हाँ तेरा हो गया. There are a lot of students who do this. Okay, मतलब आप, because देखिए prelims में you have a lot of time in paper 1, you have a lot of time, you just have 100 questions to answer, right? So a lot of students are in a hurry, like a number of you also may be in a hurry to answer the question in the first place. That is something that I personally say is a very bad strategy, and I'll also talk to you a bit about what is the way you should attempt the question, but we'll talk about it. So the first statement is correct. What about the second? Wrong. The third? How many feel that the second is wrong? Okay. What about the third? Third, how many feel it's correct? How many feel it's correct for the third option? Okay. So, दादा भाई नरोजी का सोशल इवल से कोई खास लेना देना नहीं है. Now you would say, some of you would be thinking, देखिए, no, I know what some would be thinking was that I told you that there was an organization, Rehnumai Mazdasyan Sabha, that was formed by Dada Bhai Naroji. So he also worked for social reform. ठीक है, इसे कहते हैं error of over interpretation, where your intention is not to look at the direct possible answer. You are trying to fit the option in the answer. So ये इसीलिए, you know, this is also an example when even you know things, you know, out of these, I'm saying some 50-60 questions जो are coming from your static areas also. There would be a time when you are very confident in your exam. When you're marking, either you'll be very confident that 1 only is the answer, or you would think that 1 and 3, if at all they are there on the option, yes they are there, that this is the answer. And you'll mark, fully believing that you're marking the right answer. Okay, but कई बार आप जो ऐसे आंसर्स मार्क कर रहे होंगे उसमें गलतियां होंगी. इवन व्हेन यू न्यू द टॉपिक एंड वाज अ सिंपल क्वेश्चन, द आंसर इज 1 ओनली, नॉट 1 and 3. पेरिफेरल कॉन्ट्रीब्यूशंस आर नॉट इंपॉर्टेंट. देखिए एक चीज होगा, इम्पैक्ट ऑफ ब्रिटिश रूल, कि अगर मैं आपको पूछूं कोई ऑप्शंस दूंगा तो इनडायरेक्टली तो सभी कुछ इंपैक्ट होंगे उसके. But when I ask you about a particular question, you should look at a direct answer to it, not with some fringe association here and there. Okay? तो answer options को fit करने की कोशिश मत कीजिए. Right? You should know, okay, this was his major contribution, end of the story. ज़्यादा दिमाग नहीं लगाना है. Otherwise, you'll often end up getting confused. Yeah. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about that in a while. The Ilbert Bill controversy. कोई जल्दी नहीं है. How many think A was correct? What was A with respect to? Arms Act. What about the second statement? The Vernacular Press Act. The third is the statement with respect to the Ilbert Bill and the racial discrimination in the judiciary. ये क्वेश्चन मैंने आपको नहीं पढ़ाया है. This every question is here is also with a message. The message will come to. आप आराम से क्वेश्चन को पढ़िए. I have not directly discussed this question in the class. Is because of a reason. There's no rush to arrive at the answer. There's no rush. There's absolutely no rush to give the right answer. How many think, देखिए, I'll come to the question. How many think that the first statement is right? Okay, the first statement is right. How many think that the second statement is right? How many think that the third statement is right? देखिए, अब important बात यह है कि firstly, there is, I'm telling you how the mind works in the exam. If you'll see the question, there will be some section of you who will see the question in the exam, because exam और अभी का context बहुत different होता है. Okay? तो in the exam, some of you will see this question and you will say, यार ये home charges के बारे में तो हमने कभी पढ़ा ही नहीं. Okay? So yes, there may be questions which are not directly addressed by the teacher in the class. Okay? But when you look at home charges and when you look at the options, you find another term, drain of wealth. So we had talked about drain of wealth, तो question उसके बारे में. Okay? So one thing that should happen, देखिए दो तरह के लोग होते हैं जो पेपर देने जाते हैं. मतलब एक और तीसरी तरीके होते हैं, उसकी मैं बात नहीं करता, because the third kind is those who are not preparing for the exam. I'm saying those who are preparing well, who are putting in an effort. There's some who go with the mindset that I'll do what I know well. Okay, what I know. There's another mindset of the students who primarily come from either the engineering or the medical background. They go with the mindset, it doesn't matter whether I know or no, I don't know.
I will mark the right answer. That is a very crucial mindset. मतलब सही मुझको आंसर मेरे को पता है कि नहीं, I'll eliminate, I'll do something and I'll mark answer. Okay, right? So no, why I'm saying this is because of a certain reason. I want to tell you this to you. देखिए, when you go to the prelims, how many of you are going to write the prelims for the first time? Okay, so a good portion is going to write for the first time. Now, even those people who've written before, one of the things to know is, एक बहुत ज़्यादा confusion रहता है in mind of students is how many questions to attempt. Out of 100, because आप में से कई ऐसे होंगे, those who are told by their friends, their seniors, यार negative marking है, do what you know well. Okay, otherwise don't do it. Now, so what does that mean? Do what you know well. If at all there are 100 questions, what does that mean? Does it mean 50? Does it mean 60? Does it mean 70? Or does it mean 40? Anything. देखिए, if you are just doing 40 questions, you are not there in the race. Okay, so इसको तो आप भूल जाइए. Now there is 60, 70, 80, 90, 100. सब कुछ है अभी, right? So what do you think? What is the average number of questions one should attempt? How many think 50? 60? 70? 80? 90? More than 95? देखिए, आप में से जो काफ़ी बच्चे सोच रहे हैं that you'll attempt 60 or 70, don't do that. If you are attempting 60 and 70, you'll never make it. If you are attempting 60, तो you'll not make it. Why I'm saying so, I'll come to the 70 scenario also, is that if you are attempting 60 questions, best case scenario, life is perfect, 60 into 2 is 120. Life is often not perfect. So, in the context that out of 60, even if you do 55 correct, okay, then 55 into 2 is 110. 110 minus negative marking for the 5 questions, that means less than 110, whatever it is, right? The average cutoff for the past 4 or 5 years is between 105 to 115, between that range. Okay, that range. So nobody should go into the exam and come out with the feeling कि यार मेरा होगा कि नहीं होगा. पेपर में घुसने के बाद या तो ये पता चल जाना चाहिए कि मेरा नहीं होगा या मेरा होगा ही होगा. Why I'm saying so? Because you should not come out with some uncertainty in your mind, because you are to prepare after the prelims. You cannot wait 1 month for the result and then start preparing for the mains. That time is not there. So 60 questions also attempting is a bad strategy according to me. Now, when it comes to the question of कि 70 करना है, 80 करना है, 90 करना है, 100 करना है, there is a game of some amount of subjectivity. Okay, in the sense कि आप खुद decide कर सकते हैं in the paper so what I'm saying is never attempt less than, I personally think one should attempt less than 70 in any scenario. Okay, but when it comes to beyond that, what has to be understood is, I tell students to do the question paper not once. ऐसा नहीं कि आपने question paper दिया, देखा, पढ़ा और करते गए और आपने गोले भर दिए और हो गया. Okay, it should not happen this way. I personally tell students at least to go through the question paper thrice. मतलब go through the question paper, you do the whole question paper thrice in the paper. आपके पास time बहुत होता है. In the first round, the first time you should try and attempt only questions which you know 100%. So suppose in the first round, you are able to do 50 questions. That ये 50 questions तो मुझको पता है कि ये मेरे सही हैं. You're expecting these 50 questions to be right. You have not touched the other 50. Then in the second round, you do questions. तो आप गोले मार्क करते चलिए कि ये वाले questions मैंने नहीं करे. Right? In the second round, you look on to those questions in which you are successfully able to eliminate 2 options. Suppose out of the rest 50, you are able to eliminate 2 options in another 25 questions. So that means सो वेरेवर जहां आपको दो ऑप्शंस के बीच में कंफ्यूजन है, प्लीज ये मत करिएगा कि आप नहीं कर रहे हैं उस क्वेश्चन को. A lot of time people who are making it in the exam, in the prelims, is because they are making this calculated guess. And there are a good number of people who could have made it, making the same calculated guesses, but they are erring on the side of caution. Erring on the side of gambling is another matter कि यार एक ऑप्शन तो एलिमिनेट हो गया, चलो तीन में ही मार देते हैं. That is gambling. But here you being too conservative if you're not attempting, even if you're sure कि दो ऑप्शन तो गलत हैं. दो ऑप्शन अगर आप दो बच रहे हैं तो आप मारिए, यू हैव अ 50% चांस. और जिस तरीके से मैटर है, द प्रॉब्लम इज बिकॉज द नंबर ऑफ क्वेश्चन दैट यू कैन बी श्योर अबाउट विल नेवर बी ऑफन इनफ टू गेट यू थ्रू. ओके, सो यू नीड सम अमाउंट ऑफ कैलकुलेटेड गेसेस, राइट. सो टू दैट एक्सटेंट अगर आप वो 25 हैं कि वो 30 हैं, आप तो दैट डिपेंडिंग, इट कैन बी 70, 75, 80, whatever you find is right. If any of you, those who are from the engineering background or from the, is planning to write, even agricultural background and all those, are planning to write the Forest Service exam, the Indian Forest Service exam. The Indian Forest Service also has the same prelims, right? And it is a very good service, frankly. A lot of students don't know about this, but much better than the lower ranks in the UPSC is the Indian Forest Service. It is an all India service. Okay, and unlike that, there are many services which are not all India services which are actually recruited through UPSC. So the lower ranks वाली जो positions होती हैं उससे much better है forest. But the forest के साथ problem ये है that the cutoff of the prelims is very high. Okay, so if you are aiming for forest, anything less than 80 questions, 85 questions is not going to do. Okay, at least 80 questions तो आपको करने ही होंगे if you are planning for forest. So वो individual subjectivity कि आपको 70 करने हैं कि 80 करने हैं कि 90 is up to you. But don't err on the side of caution, and that doesn't also mean that आपको चार में से बस एक ही ऑप्शन के बारे में पता है, you're gambling between 3 options. Anything beyond a 50% probability is not a risk worth taking. Okay, so that is there because you have a 1/3 or a 33% negative marking in the first place. So अब इस question में, this is a question about the drain of wealth, and in this question, as I told you that the expenses of Indian administration were paid by Indians. So if there was an Indian office in London, हमने तो कभी बात नहीं करी कि there was an Indian office in London or not. लेकिन if there was an Indian office in London, it had to be paid by Indians. So obviously the first statement is going to be correct even from what you knew before, even we had not discussed about home charges. The second, obviously to pay salaries and pensions of Indians, which is an obvious part of drain of wealth that we had talked about. The third is a statement which will always cause many doubts. In fact, when this option came also in the exam, because the answer key comes after a year. Okay, so there were many people who were saying that option 3 is, statement 3 is whether it is correct or incorrect. There was a doubt on this because, yes, because which of the following because there were wars which were fought by the British Indian Army outside India as well. Okay, so there were some who said that this also constituted a drain of wealth. But primarily, the British Indian Army was used to expand within India. Okay, so that is why there would have been a current statement. Funds were used for waging wars within India by the British. That would have been a correct. इस पे हमेशा doubt था. Frankly, ये तभी clear हुआ था जब answer sheet आ गई थी next year. Okay, and that is why जब भी prelims की answer sheets आती हैं, tentative answer sheets these days from any coaching institution, there is a variation. Primarily because of this reason, because there's some questions nobody is very sure about. So, anyways, the doubt could only be between 1 and 2 and 1, 2 and 3. Because 1 and 2 are correct. The answer when it came out, the correct answer was 1 and 2. Why I did not put this in the PPT also is because I want you to be mentally prepared for a situation where questions may come in spite of whatever we discuss. Something that is related to your knowledge but does not directly copy में से उठ के नहीं आया है. Okay? So that ways, for those kind of questions also you should be prepared and don't leave out on such questions. If you leave out on a question like this, You know, you say that I'm not sure, so I didn't attempt. You are doing, it's a bad decision to make. If in the first round, for example, you're attempting these questions in your paper, in the first round, you find that you are able to do only 40 questions. Okay? Or even less than that, 35 questions out of 100. Then this can happen only in two ways. Either you have not prepared for the exam very well, that is why you're just attempting 35 questions surely out of 100, or you are doing too much of overthinking in the questions. कि यार आप इस क्वेश्चन में भी सोच रहे हो या इसके पहले वाला जैसे जो हमने दादाभाई नरोजी वाला देखा था, यू आर ओवर इंटरप्रिटिंग, राइट? सो ओवर इंटरप्रिटेशन शुड नॉट हैपन. डोंट ट्राई टू फिट इन द ऑप्शंस. देखिए एक चीज यूपीएससी में हमेशा होगी, इफ यू विल इनडायरेक्टली ट्राई टू फिट इन द ऑप्शंस ऊपर, हाँ 3 भी तो सही हो ही सकता है क्योंकि ये भी तो हुआ ही था, तो हर ऑप्शन करेक्ट हो जाएगा. इसका मतलब ये नहीं है कि जब भी 1, 2 और 3 नीचे है तो 1, 2 and 3 इज ऑलवेज करेक्ट, राइट? सो आई एम टेलिंग यू दिस इज बिकॉज दिस इज ऑल जो आपको धीमे धीमे यू विल हैव टू पिक दैट अप. ओके, द नेक्स्ट क्वेश्चन. आराम से, कोई जल्दी नहीं है. The first statement, is it correct? How many think it's correct? How many think that the first statement is not correct? Okay. What about the second statement? Second statement is? How many think that the second statement is correct? Okay. What about the third statement? How many think that the third statement is correct? देखिए, चिल्ला चिल्ला के मैंने बोला था that Vedas are infallible is about Arya Samaj, not about the Brahmo Samaj. Even if you know that third is incorrect, it leaves you with 2 options. Now, अब आप मुझे एक चीज बताइए. If, because I saw in terms of your, there were some who raised the hand on 1, but did not, or there were some who raised the hand on 2, but did not raise the hand on 1. How is that possible? That you should think in this context that what was the Brahmo Samaj stood for rationality. If by the idea of rationality, they opposed the intervention of the priestly class, the idea of rationality also opposed the worship of idols. Right? That God cannot take an anthropomorphic form. ओके, सो अगर आप, तो यही होता है. देखिए क्या होगा, कई ऐसे क्वेश्चन, ये नहीं होना चाहिए. ये तो आपका तब, आई एम फ्रैंकली पुटिंग दिस, व्हेन यू आर रिवाइजिंग मेनी सब्जेक्ट्स, यू आर देयर इन द एग्जाम, टेंशन में भी होते हैं. कोई ब्राह्मो समाज को आर्य समाज को ब्राह्मो समाज भी पढ़ लेता है और सब मार देता है. Okay, when this question came, a lot of students made this mistake. They also went ahead with the third option, that this is also correct. Okay, yes, because this statement is correct. And this is associated with social reforms also, but not with Brahmo Samaj, but with Arya Samaj. So that is also there, and there is no way that 2 is correct and 1 is incorrect. If 1 is incorrect, then only option 3 is the answer. If 1 is incorrect, because 1 is there in all the options, so 1 cannot be incorrect. देखिए दिमाग, that is why I am saying you have to develop that mindset that I have to crack this question. If I have read this, even if I have not, I'm not completely sure, I have to crack this question. आराम से, कोई जल्दी नहीं. You look at the options, you look at the statements, you look at the options, and then make up. I'll telling you what are the kind of mistakes students do. For example, students have done this mistake also, that often what the UPSC intentionally does is puts this much on one page, और अगर यहाँ पे 4 स्टेटमेंट होते हैं तो puts this much on one page. These options are there on the next page. These options are there on the next page. This is there on this page, lower end of the page. आप ये 4 स्टेटमेंट देखते हैं और आप एक स्टेटमेंट को टिक करके गोला भर देते हैं. फिर अगला पेज जब पलटेंगे आप तो you will see that options are there 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4. आपने तो पहले ही मार दिया. Students do this also. And frankly, when it comes to the last, right, it doesn't matter whether you're qualifying by 10 marks or 20 marks. if there were just 2 questions जो आपकी silly mistake से गलत हो गए, जो आपको आते थे, देखिए जो नहीं आता था वो तो नहीं आता था, जो आता था उसमें अगर if you're doing silly mistake, that is going to be a very costly exercise. Okay, so देखिए this should not happen after the first prelims. Why am I putting so much time here? Taking out from this is to put this in your head that don't do these kind of silly mistakes, right? And so that is there. Okay, this is. How many think A is the correct answer? B? Right? So B is the correct answer. Why also? आपको बस ये पता होना चाहिए that अब Curzon, King George abrogated Curzon's Act at Royal Darbar. It all is a useless information that is given there to convince you, to confuse you. You should just know whether that the World War I happened after and it had no role in the partition of Bengal, and you should know that it was annulled in 1911. Civil disobedience का कोई relation नहीं है, partition का कोई relation नहीं है, right? Also, one just anecdotal also information here itself is that when the partition of Bengal was annulled, the capital of British rule in India was moved from Calcutta to Delhi. That's all. Okay. Now we will take forward our discussion from here on. Any doubts still here? Okay. Now, if we look at the 1914 era, on the one side in 1914, yeah.
Can we just quickly go through the reasons of annulment of partition?
The reasons for annulment of partition of Bengal were 2 important reasons. One of the things the British did not want it to become an incident which was used by the future generation of the Congress to prove time and again how the British have been insensitive to Indian demands. Secondly, acts of militant nationalism from 1908 onwards had become a constant nuisance. It was not something that could have directly challenged the British rule in India, but at the same point of time, it was creating political instability and an atmosphere of fear. And the British decided to do away with this.
Were these acts of militant nationalism aimed at Bengal revolt against Bengal partition?
Yeah, the militant nationalism at this point of time primarily was directed against the partition of Bengal itself. Yeah, any other doubts? Yeah.
How can we say that it was an act of showing sensitivity?
No, I'm not saying act of showing sensitivity. What he's asking is how can we say that it was an act of showing sensitivity? I'm not saying it was an act of showing sensitivity. It was an act where they wanted to take away a significant political demand or a significant political issue that the Congress had made out. The Congress had made it a significant political issue, the partition of Bengal. See, the British are so insensitive. See, the British are so insensitive. So to ensure that the British cannot be criticized by the Congress on this issue, they did away with the partition. Now you would say, why did they do it in the first place if they had to annul it? No, I'm saying at times we often think about this question also. Why did they go ahead with the policy when they had to annul it in the first place? To give you a contextual example, the recent new government came ahead with the land acquisition law and was forced to drop it later because of the tremendous resistance. Because that act was being used to portray the BJP government as an anti-farmer government. Okay, so that is why. So that's in a same way, it was something that would become an emblem in the hands of the Congress to again point out how the British are so, insensitive to Indian demands. Yeah. Tell me.
At that same time, the Bengal famine was going on.
Bengal famine.
At the same time, he has Delhi Darbar, which was very lavish.
Delhi Darbar is 1870s. No, that other Delhi Darbar also, yeah, that also happened in 1911. Yeah, that time also there was a famine and then there was a Delhi Darbar that was organized then also. In 1870, yeah.
Was it then to divert the attention from famine and Darbar to
देखिए,
that we have again recalculated
no, the understanding was that, it was a part of the complex give and take. That is not useful for the exam. That is why I was not discussing. For example, the decision to shift from Calcutta to Delhi was there to assuage the Muslim League, because the Muslim League was very unhappy with the annulment of partition. So they said through the Muslim League that we are shifting the capital from Calcutta, because Calcutta was one which was there in West Bengal, was more closer, dominated by the non-Muslim elites there. So we'll shift the capital to Delhi with the idea that the Mughals had always ruled from Delhi. So this was there, and on the other side was the desire to placate even the other section by annulling the partition. And the Delhi Darbar also happened in this particular context itself. But none of his examination point of view is not relevant anyways. Yeah, any other doubts still here?
Foundation of Ghadar Party was laid after the First World War or before the First World War?
The foundation of the Ghadar Party was laid in 1914 itself. By that time, United States had not joined the World War. Okay? And in 1914 only the World War had started. Okay? So that is there. So it was laid during the World War itself, but by then US had not joined the World War. Yeah.
How could how could Tilak join the British forces? Sorry, not the British forces. They were supported British actually in
How was Tilak?
and at the same time in this Ghadar Party they were opposing the British government.
Okay, we'll come to this question, because when I'll discuss the Home Rule League, you'll understand that. Your question will be answered when we'll discuss the Home Rule League. Why was Tilak not actually opposing the British at this point of time? So we'll answer that. To answer that question, we'll first discuss the Home Rule League movement, and it will automatically become clear to you. Okay? Any other doubts still here? And if there is a doubt, we'll take it again. No issues. Any other doubts still here? Okay. So now discussing the Home Rule League movement, what is important to know from an examination point of view is that, as I told you, that there was a section of population led by Tilak who were of the opinion that Tilak, when he had come out of jail, was not the Tilak of 1908, in the sense that Tilak was also ready to, mellow down his demands to reach a rapprochement with the moderates. So while the moderates wanted to support the British, primarily expecting a return after the World War, Tilak also by and large was of the opinion that he wanted to reach a rapprochement with the Congress, and at the same point of time wanted to give the government also an opportunity. So at this point of time, Tilak basically went ahead with Annie Besant, trying to convince the moderates on the one side. At the same point of time, extending, Tilak wanted to prove his intentions also to the moderates, that he was serious about a rapprochement with the moderates, and that is why he also extended his support to the British at this point of time. But he also explicitly added that we are explicitly doing this with the hope that the British will devolve significant devolution of power, which will significantly devolve power immediately after the war. So that was Tilak's understanding. And to make it a point that Tilak's support was conditional, that the devolution of power happens after the war, Tilak along with Annie Besant started the Home Rule League movements. देखिए, just before Gandhi came, the Home Rule League movement was the most important mass movement that happened before Gandhi. Now Annie Besant and Tilak both were of the opinion that they wanted to express the fact that, the Indian masses had not anything to do directly with the World War. Because yes, we were not directly in any way involved in the war. And it was not a war of Indian interests also. But to extend to their support to the British at this need of hour for the British was something that they were ready to do, provided the British were ready to devolve power after the war. And to make it a point that Indians, want to press ahead with the demand for self-government, they started the Home Rule League movement. Basically, in this Home Rule League movement, what Annie Besant did was she organized a number of committees throughout India, specifically in the province of Madras and areas around Madras, but also throughout India, as in Bengal, etc. also, where these committees were formed and they basically did a number of street plays. They went and talked to the public, carrying out this demand that Indians should be given, or devolution of power should happen to India immediately after the war. Tilak was restricted primarily to the Bombay province because he was a popular leader there. He was out of the jail, and he was looking for bringing in some sort of a mass organization, even short of full-scale demanding the removal of British. So they could not demand the removal of British primarily because he wanted a rapprochement with the moderates, and also Tilak was also aware that this was a time that if there are going to be any mass movement, the government is going to crack down on it very heavily because it already has. So this is not going to enter into any negotiation. So the Home Rule League movement did not want immediate devolution of power. It just wanted an assurance to come from the British in that context. And so the Home Rule League movement was a less charged but a more effective response as compared to the Ghadar movement to India's participation in World War I. जब हम, for example, if at all ऐसा question आता है आपकी मेंस में, discuss the impact of World War I on the Indian freedom struggle. Okay? Or how did World War I impact the Indian freedom struggle? अगर ऐसा question आता है, then you will write about the Ghadar movement. That was the militant aspect, whereas the non-violent, non-militant aspect was the Home Rule League movement. While the Ghadar movement did not achieve its immediate objectives, but the Home Rule League movement was successful in the sense that it was able to organize a all India mass movement at this point of time, where they would demand the withdrawal of the, or where they would demand the devolution of power in the post-independence era. So it was less charismatic. अब आपको भी लग रहा होगा कि गदर का तो सीधा साधा प्लान है भाई, कि हम ये करेंगे फिर ये होगा फिर ये होगा, लेकिन वैसा तो कुछ हुआ नहीं. So in terms of having a very clear, concrete plan, the Ghadar movement had a very fascinating plan, but it was something that could not be implemented. But in contrast to that, the Home Rule League movement had a very slow and sustained program that it wanted to generate anti-war consciousness. This was indirectly to tell to the masses that Indian masses had no direct stake in the war, and yet we were supporting the British, primarily with the hope that the British will devolve power. And if the British did not devolve power, then this could be used as an argument to wage a mass movement that the British are betraying Indians, that they wanted Indian support and Indians extended their support, but not unconditionally. So the Home Rule League movement was short of demanding a full overthrow of the British, but at the same point of time wanted to press ahead with the demand, and also wanted to keep the masses politically engaged under a nationalist consciousness. So that was the contribution. So Tilak basically, along with Annie Besant, started this after his release from the jail, and inspired here also. Annie Besant was inspired by the Irish Home Rule Leagues, because at the same time there were Irish Home Rule Leagues in Ireland also, which had also been formed, and there the Irish had also demanded that the British should devolve power immediately after the war if they want the support of the Irish in the. So United Kingdom has Ireland, Scotland, all of these things under the United Kingdom. Then they were the white colonies under the British. So Annie Besant launched the Home Rule League, and they launched a campaign demanding self-government for India after war on the lines of white colonies. See, they are not demanding complete overthrow, again, to ensure that the moderates are not, separated from them, because they're trying the rapprochement with moderates also, but they want self-government on the lines of white colonies. And Tilak's league was restricted to Maharashtra and central provinces, whereas Annie Besant formed in Madras, which covered the rest of India. Now, when we evaluate the Home Rule Leagues, the campaign conveyed to the common man the message of Home Rule as self-government. What they want is self-rule, right? And it carried a much wider appeal than earlier mobilizations did, and attracted the politically backward areas of Gujarat and Sindh. So ये जो point है, ये आपको positive contribution of Home Rule League movement hai. So this is also a contrast that in World War I, immediately World War I had two impacts. One was that World War I led to apart from other reasons also, it was an instance which led to the Gadar movement, but it also led to the Home Rule League movement. Whereas the Gadar movement was unsuccessful in achieving its immediate objectives, the Home Rule League movement was able to build on nationalist consciousness and ensure mass mobilization even in politically backward areas. So that is why that line was there. That was a less charged but more useful intervention. It used plays, songs, libraries, etc. to promote political education of the masses. And this is the significance of the Home Rule League movement again. That the movement shifted the emphasis away from the educated elite to the masses and permanently deflected the movement from the course mapped by the moderates. Kyunki you see, even when Tilak and Annie Besant are seeking a rapprochement with the moderates, they are not giving up on the mass movement, because that is so integral to their understanding and their ideas and strategies. So that was there. At the same point of time, as I told you, that on the one side they launched the Home Rule League movements, and Tilak was anyways a popular figure. So Tilak was building on his popularity once again, but at the same point of time was seeking a rapprochement with the moderates. And because of Tilak and Annie Besant's effort, in 1916, ये important है, कि in 1916 at the Lucknow session, ये prelims के लिए this is important, that at the Lucknow session 1916, the rapprochement between the Congress and between the moderates and the extremists happened. And this, the significance of the Lucknow session is that it revived Congress again as an effective instrument of nationalism or Indian nationalism, because the Surat split had weakened the Congress as a effective instrument. अब देखिए, मैं आपसे एक चीज और के बारे में थोड़ी सी बात अभी कर ले रहा हूं, लेकिन बिकॉज इट इज रिटन हियर, दैट इज व्हाई आई एम टॉकिंग हियर. इन फैक्ट यू कैन राइट दिस विथ मी हियर ओनली, दैट if you are ever to write about key international events, and their impact on the Indian freedom struggle, then World War I, here you will write about World War I, and World War I में you will write about both Gadar and the Home Rule Leagues. Then the next thing that you will write about is the Russian Revolution क्या था. I am very briefly telling you, okay? Because obviously we'll discuss this maybe in world history and everything later. So basically the Russian Revolution was, देखिए Russia में there used to be a monarchy, okay? And there was this monarchy in Russia which was replaced, or which was overthrown by Lenin and Trotsky. Firstly, through what was an attempt, that was the February Revolution. In 1917, they tried twice, once in the February, another in the October. So the October Revolution, after the 1917 revolution, Lenin and Trotsky primarily overthrew the Russian monarch, and supported by their supporters, they basically took over the control of the government. So they overthrew the monarchy and they took over the control of the government. Now, the Russian Revolution, after the formation of after the Russian Revolution and after the overthrow of monarchy, they declared Russia as a Soviet Union. Now, what does this term Soviet means? The Soviet term Soviet means a union of workers. Union of worker meaning, if you apply then a union of workers, then Soviet Union is a union of workers, meaning it will be a country where power will be in the hands of workers. So political power, economic power, everything will be in the hands of workers. So even the ownership of industries would be in the hands not of any individual capitalist or any particular individual, but the workers. So those who work in the steel factory would own the steel factory. Those who work in the cottage industry or in the textile industry will own the steel industry. So that is why the whole idea of Russian Revolution was also dictatorship of the proletariat. अब ये क्या है? प्रोलेटेरिएट का मतलब वर्कर, डिक्टेटरशिप ऑफ द वर्कर, दैट द वर्कर विल ओन द इंडस्ट्री, वर्कर विल कीप द प्रॉफिट्स एंड एवरीथिंग विल बिलोंग टू द वर्कर. क्योंकि आइडिया क्या था? द आइडिया वॉज वेरी सिंपल, दैट हु इज द वन हु डज द वर्क इन द फैक्ट्री इज द वर्कर. He is the one or she is the one who's actually working for hours together to produce a good. So they should be the one who should get to keep the profits. And so if the workers are to keep the profits, they should also own the industries. Only then they will get to keep the profits. So workers should own the industries. Similarly, a agricultural farmer should own the land that he cultivates. A worker who's working on land or cultivating land should own that land. A worker who's working in an industry should own that industry. So that was the whole idea. So with this political ideology is Lenin who came to power. And with their coming to power, they immediately nationalized all the major industries. Nationalized meaning that the government took over control. Now the understanding was that the government was to be a government of the workers, and the workers through the Soviet government was to own the industries that they worked in. So one of the impacts of the Russian Revolution was that, I'm telling you this because that's how we will see its impact on the Indian freedom struggle. That on the one side, Russian Revolution inspired a number of Indian nationalists, primarily because, you know, once Lenin came to power in 1920s, then after Lenin, more so with Stalin, over the next 20 years, the Russian economy became one of the most powerful economies in the world. So the success that Russia registered in a small amount of time after overthrowing monarchy and bringing in the rule of the people inspired a number of Indian revolutionaries, that if they could also establish their own self-rule, India could also embark on the path of industrialization and quick economic growth in a small amount of time. At the same point of time, in 1920s, when this Russian Revolution was happening, okay, and this was, we'll see the connect also with Bhagat Singh and others, because this is the same ideology which inspired Bhagat Singh and others also. That inspired by the activities of the Soviet Union, specifically in the arena of land reforms, because when Stalin came, though this was very bloody, but Stalin brought in radical land reforms in Russia. He took away all the ownership from feudal landlords and gave it to the people. In fact, all the feudal landlords were killed. And it was a very bloody thing, because it wasn't that landlords were going to give the land and then they're going to sweetly, you know, give away their power. So this was a very bloody kind of a land reform system in which more than lakhs of landlords were killed. And he gave the ownership of land to the peasants themselves. So they brought in radical land reforms. Land reforms are very important to tackle economic inequality. If you want to tackle economic inequality in an agricultural economy, you have to give ownership of land to the people who cultivate it. Similarly, if you want to tackle economic inequality in a industrialized society, then workers should be given more rights, or the workers should be given the ownership of the industries. This was the idea, primarily to reduce economic inequality, that nationalization of key industries was sought to be done. And also what was sought to be done was bringing in radical land reforms. So the success of the Russian Revolution during the 1920s inspired a number of Congress leaders also. We will see that the younger generation of congressmen like Nehru, like Subhash Chandra Bose, they were inspired by the ideology and the success of Jawaharlal Nehru. I'm saying Jawaharlal Nehru, Subhash Chandra Bose, they were inspired by the success of the Russian Revolution, and they wanted that in the post-independence era, India also should embark on a similar path. And that is why in the post-independence era, we chose a state-led model of industrialization and state ownership of key heavy industries. Okay, so that was one of the things. But apart from the congressmen also, the Russian Revolution inspired a number of other younger revolutionaries, such as Bhagat Singh, Sukhdev, etc. And they were of the opinion, we will see later, they came to an understanding that independence cannot be achieved merely by the overthrow of the British, But for achieving independence, it is not just important to overthrow the British, but also overthrow all the feudal practices and systems in India. Bhagat Singh very famously said that by independence we do not mean that the foreign invader should be replaced by the indigenous landlord. That is not what is independence. Independence is when we end exploitation of man by man in all forms. So it doesn't matter. It is not true independence if the foreign invader is replaced by the Indian zamindar. We should end exploitation of the worker at the hands of anybody who is the exploiter, whether it is the outsider or insider. So that is the kind of way in which the Russian Revolution even inspired the Indian generation of revolutionaries. मैं इसी एक ही जगह पे इसलिए बता दे रहा हूँ क्योंकि अब I don't want to talk about the Russian Revolution later again, okay? But I'll just briefly refer when we come to it. Also, we talk about key international events, then we'll also talk about World War II, okay? So we'll talk about World War II separately, but आप एक ही जगह उसको लिख के रख लीजिए. So that is there. Now, if this much is clear, okay, in the sense, the next important thing that I want to talk about is that मैंने आपको बताया आपके पास जो timeline है कि the Lucknow Pact happened in 1916. On the one side, it brought the rapprochement between moderates and extremists. On the other side, it tried to bring about a rapprochement between the Congress and the Muslim League. दोनों चीजें हो रही थी लखनऊ सेशन में ही. So it readmitted extremists led by Tilak back to the Congress fold. Annie Besant try कर रही थी. In 1915, she was the one to play an important role. She chaired a session also of the Congress. In 1915, in 1916, basically the rapprochement happened. And the Lucknow session also saw the Muslim League and Congress coming together and pressing for common demands against the British. अब देखिए, as I told you, जो मैंने आपको अभी थोड़ी देर पहले ही बताया था, that the Muslim League by 1914-15 had also undergone a generational change. It had also undergone a generational change, and from being loyalist to the British, even the Muslim League now acquired an anti-imperialist tone, because they also realized that in the long-term interest, even they, so I'm not saying that the Muslim League now realized that they were not following the right path or something. The Muslim League only realized that in their long-term interest, it was not something good to support the British. So to that extent, why did this happen, or the reasons for the shift in the League's position from a loyalist position to an anti-imperialist one, was guided by many factors. Firstly, the League came to be dominated by younger nationalists, younger Muslim League nationalists, and came closer to the Congress objective. The League in many ways outgrew the loyalist outlook of the Aligarh school of thought. That assumption that by merely professing loyalty to the British you will get more education and jobs was something that was not actually materializing into anything substantive on the ground level, because they thought that this would happen, that by professing loyalty they'll get more access to education and jobs, but that did not happen. In fact, one of the things also was there that in 1910 only, one of the things that the Muslim League, even before 1910, had been demanding was that the Mohammedan Anglo-Oriental College, the Mao College, should be converted into a university. But the British had been delaying. Okay, the British had been delaying from 1906 onward itself. It had been more than 10 years but they did not, I'm just telling this, okay, that they did not convert the Mao College into a university. And it is much later in 1921 that they converted the Mao College into the university, that is the Aligarh Muslim University. So a number of younger Muslim nationalists were saying that, listen, they're not really serious in terms of empowering the Muslim masses, because they're taking so long to even pass a university and give legal recognition also. So this means they're not very serious. So this is also why they outgrew the loyalist outlook. Also, the question of Khilafat was yet to arise. The question of Khilafat did not come. But Just a second. He's just making a call so that, you know. चलिए ये जब तक हो रहा है then we'll talk about this. Quick action. Okay, so now we can continue. In the sense, the second important reason also was that even before the Khilafat question had arisen, the Muslim League had been saying that, you know, Turkey should not be subjected to, or the Ottoman Empire should not be subjected to any kind of vindictive action by the British. But the British had made it very clear in 1915 and 16 that Turkey is on the opposite side and it will have to bear the consequences. So Britain's refusal to help Turkey in the war in the Balkan region itself was also because the Ottoman Empire wanted to expand in the Balkan regions then. Balkan regions क्या है? Eastern Europe का portion जो that was overlapping with West Asia. Okay, so Turkey wanted to expand. Britain did not help Turkey, and Turkey went with Germany then. Okay, so the very fact, it was very clear to the Muslim League that the British is not sympathetic to the cause of the Ottoman Empire was also one of the reasons that the Muslim League shifted again against the British. And finally, also, as I told you, that the annulment of partition of Bengal was a major grievance that they had in the very first place. So that was there. So bhaiya, एक चीज important है, that is for you to understand, is the significance of the Lucknow Pact. The significance of the Lucknow Pact was not that the Muslim League and the Congress said that, oh, we are brothers and, you know, we're gonna fight together all the time. The limited understanding of the Muslim League was this, that yes, Congress had an anti-imperialist orientation, and the Muslim League also from now had acquired an anti-imperialist tone. But this did not mean that there was a complete meeting of hearts or a complete, you know, coming together of their ideology. देखिए, Muslim League की एक central ideology ये थी. There were two assumptions, you know, on which the idea of Muslim League was built. The first assumption was that all Muslims have similar political, economic, as well as religious interests. Okay, in the sense, और इसी idea पे any religiously oriented political party can be based upon. That suppose if I say that I am a representative of the Muslim League, then the Muslim League idea was based on this, that all, not just religious interests of Muslims, but apart from religious interests also, political, economic interests of all Muslims are same. Meaning, a Muslim zamindar has same economic interests as a Muslim peasant. No, which is exactly not true. A Muslim zamindar has more in common with a Hindu zamindar in terms of economic interests. Because the zamindars would want to retain their landed privileges. So a zamindar, irrespective of their religion, will be a zamindar and is unlikely to find a common cause with a landless peasant. But no, the assumption of the Muslim League was that because individuals belong to a particular religion, not just their religious interests are same, but their political and economic interests are also same, which is obviously completely a false notion, right? At the same point of time, the second assumption was that, okay, पहला assumption तो ही गलत था, and that was this. The second assumption was that they are the representative of Muslim interest. So just because you are a Muslim and you are a political organization composed mainly of Muslims, then you are the representative of Muslim interests. So there was no reason to believe at this point of time that even if one were to assume that Muslims were one common community or one cohesive community, that the Muslim League was the leader of the Muslim interest, because it wasn't composed of any grassroots leaders who enjoyed any mass popularity. So on both these counts, the Muslim League was in a world of its own. Okay? Even today, for example, you will find many political parties, for example, the MNS. If the MNS or the Maharashtra Navnirman Sena find itself as an political party based on a regional identity of the Maratha identity, then it is based on the assumption that the Maratha identity is what binds all the Maharashtrians together, irrespective of their economic and political differences. And that is the first assumption. The second assumption is they enjoy the popularity and that they are the real leaders of the Maratha cause. And both of them are incorrect. Even today, because you see the vote share that the MNS has is hardly a few seats outside Bombay or outside Mumbai. They have absolutely no political representation. So, you know, that could also be said about others also, but this is not the right time. So, for example, one of the common jokes about the left in India also is that the left is nowhere left. In the sense that they fail to capitalize upon any, you know, like build a mass base for themselves in any meaningful manner. Okay. Now, so one of the significance why I was telling you all of this is because of this reason, that the Lucknow Pact signaled a shift in the approach of the Muslim League, that they had acquired an anti-imperialist orientation, and to a limited extent it brought the Congress and the Muslim League together. Okay, but at the same point of time the Lucknow Pact was also in a way, you know, why this is why the Muslim League was coming to join the Congress. But why did the Congress sign the Lucknow Pact with the Muslim League? This was because of two reasons, or primarily because of the reason that the Congress wanted to do away with any criticism that it was a political party which did not give space to minorities. So the Congress, so because of this, there were many Muslim leaders within the Congress right from the inception, like Badruddin Tayyibji and others. Okay, Maulana Ansari, Badruddin Tayyibji and others were there from the very start of the Congress. But apart from that also, the Congress wanted to do away with any kind of a criticism. And so the Congress said that, listen, we are entering into an agreement with the Muslim League, and this should be sufficient reason for Muslim League to believe that the Congress does not wish to sideline the Muslim League from the politics of the country. Rather, it is allowing it to, or it is, you know, ready to enter into a form of alliance with them on an equal footing. But on the other hand, the problem was that the Muslim League were the ones who had always been demanding separate electorates. And they got separate electorates after 1909. And so the Muslim League and the informal agreement that Congress reached with the Muslim League was also a kind of endorsement of the politics of Muslim League. You will enter into an alliance with another political party only when you have a certain degree of consensus with the political party. For example, today, if the Samajwadi Party is going to reach a consensus with the Congress, then there is a tacit understanding that they both belong to the same ideology, or, you know, they believe in the same kind of a system, right? So if the Congress had in 1909 also opposed separate electorates, okay, but the fact that it has opposed separate electorates did not mean much if it was going ahead to form an informal alliance with the Muslim League, which had always argued for separate electorates, right? So this was a kind of an indirect endorsement of the politics of Muslim League by the Congress. The Congress was in a bad situation. One could say it was in a fix, not in a bad situation, but it was in a fix. If the Congress would have sidelined and would have refused to enter into any negotiations with the Muslim League would have said, listen, we always told you that the Congress always wanted to sideline the minorities, and this is their proof, their arrogance, that they're refusing to even enter into a cooperation with the Muslim League. But when they entered into a cooperation with the Muslim League, it set into an unhealthy trend where they gave a tacit endorsement or an informal recognition to the politics of the Muslim League. So if you do, damned you don't. Right? So in the sense that so this was the significance of the Lucknow Pact itself. That while the League agreed to press joint constitutional demands with the Congress to the government, the Congress accepted the Muslim League's position on separate electorates. इसका मतलब ये नहीं है Congress formally acknowledged. Congress never formally acknowledged separate electorates. Okay, even we will see in 1928, Congress said that we are against separate electorates, but yet it was going ahead on a political plank with a political party जिसका central demand ही separate electorates था. Okay, right? So on the face of it, they always kept saying that we are opposed to separate electorates, but this was a tacit matlab unspoken acceptance of this politics of the Muslim League. So the positive aspect was that the acceptance or the indirect acceptance of the recognition of the Muslim League and the principle of separate electorates was seen as a serious attempt to, take care of minority fears, especially those represented by the Muslim League. What had the Muslim League always said? That the Congress will sideline it, but now the Congress is recognizing the Muslim League is entering into an alliance with the Muslim League. So this is like Congress is treating the Muslim League as an equal. So Congress is doing everything as of now to allay the fears of the Muslim League, that we are not trying to sideline you from the struggle against the British. And secondly, the negative was that the Lucknow Pact was a tacit acceptance of the idea that the Congress and the League represented separate political interests. Abhi, the idea that Muslim League was actually a valid representative of Muslims was somehow recognized with the fact that Congress was entering into an alliance with them. Why would Congress enter into an alliance with a political nobody? If Congress was recognizing the Muslim League entering into an alliance, that means the Muslim League carried certain weight. And so it was in a way thus a representation of the idea that the Muslim League represented Muslim interests. And if the Muslim League represented Muslim interests, then in some way the Congress did not. So indirectly, at some level, it is recognizing the politics of the Muslim League. So that was there. And so that is why some books say that this was a major landmark in the evolution of two-nation theory of the Muslim League. But I personally do not think so, and you're not even expected to write this. Though you can also, but even if you don't write this, it's fine. In the sense that this represented the major landmark where Congress gave a tacit acceptance to the politics of the Muslim League and the idea that Muslims constituted a separate political interest, a separate political group, and Muslim League was a representative of Muslims in the very first place. So that was the negative aspect. Okay, क्योंकि अगर because this was, चलिए इस पे हम बाद में आ जाएंगे, लेकिन अभी के लिए आप बस इतना समझ लीजिए. Okay, because we'll talk about this further, it will become clear. So also another negative of this was that this was an agreement primarily between the leaders of Congress and the leaders of the Muslim League. There was no effort to make the masses understand the significance of, such a alliance. The masses were to draw their own conclusions, but they did not go together to address the masses in any significant way. So the Lucknow Pact का significance क्या है? अगर prelims में ये question आता है that what was the significance of the Lucknow Pact? Statement A, that the Lucknow Pact brought about a rapprochement between the moderates and the extremists. That's a true statement. Yeah. The second statement is that the Lucknow Pact gave a tacit acceptance to the politics of the Muslim League. Yes, the Lucknow Pact was a hidden or was an indirect acceptance for the practice of the politics of the Muslim League. और the Lucknow Pact की दो ही चीजें आपको याद रखनी है, moderate extremist unity and also the agreement between the Congress and the Muslim League. अब बात ये थी, and we will come to this, that the Congress and the Muslim League were to decide on what issue were they going to pick up in the first place to present a joint demand to the British. And this issue was the Khilafat question. The Khilafat question, which was later to lead to the Khilafat non-cooperation movement also, it was the issue that was the first issue which was sought to be picked up by the Muslim League and the Congress together, along with the support of Muhammad Ali and Shaukat Ali. Okay, so we'll talk about that. But before that, now about that issue we will talk in a while. For now, the Khilafat question we'll talk in a while. But before that, let's talk about just a second. नहीं कुछ नहीं हुआ है. There is no question of leaving you at this point of time. Don't even dare to think about it. Okay, so as a consequence, okay, now as a consequence of something, that was the Home Rule League movements, that the Home Rule League movements one of the things that Indians had been demanding was self-government in the lights of white colonies, and also because the constitutional reform was due as another decade was about to pass from 1909, the government sent in the Montagu-Chelmsford Committee in 1917, on the basis of which recommendation the Government of India Act of 1919 was implemented. So what we are going to do today, and we'll end with that, is discuss the key provisions of the Government of India Act 1919, and जब भी आपको, and जो इनके key provisions हैं that are very important from the prelims point of view specifically, और जब भी आपको गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया एक्ट 1919 की बात करनी हो, सो यू शुड थिंक अबाउट केजरीवाल. That is primarily because of the reason that what Kejriwal is demanding for Delhi is what we were also demanding back then, and basically it will be very easy to understand if you keep Kejriwal in mind. That is why I am saying this. In the sense that in the 1919 Act, by 1919 the British had decided to establish provincial councils at the level of the provinces and the central councils at the central level. जैसे आपके state legislature होती है और central legislature होती है, right? So for the central there was to be the imperial legislative council, and at the state level were to be the provincial legislative councils. अब देखिए ये बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है, इसलिए प्लीज प्ले अटेंशन हियर दैट व्हाट वाज इंट्रोड्यूस्ड एट द प्रोविंशियल लेवल वाज डायarchy. नाउ व्हाट इज दिस डायarchy? डायarchy, मोनार्की का मतलब क्या होता है? रूलर रूल ऑफ द किंग. मोनार्की का मतलब सिर्फ ये नहीं होता है दैट द रूल ऑफ वन इंडिविजुअल. द रूल मोनार्की का मतलब सिर्फ ये नहीं होता है रूल ऑफ द किंग. इट ऑल्सो मीन्स मोनो मीन्स वन. रूल ऑफ वन इंडिविजुअल इज मोनार्की. रूल ऑफ अ फ्यू इंडिविजुअल्स इज ओलिगार्की. ओके, रूल ऑफ टू इज डायarchy. ओके, सो मैं आपको इसलिए बता रहा हूं दैट यू शुड नॉट हैव टू, यू विल नॉट हैव टू मेमोराइज ऐसा, मतलब फिर यू नो विदाउट अंडरस्टैंडिंग. सो व्हाट दे इंट्रोड्यूस वाज अ रूल ऑफ टू पीपल एट द प्रोविंशियल लेवल. So what had been Indians been demanding was self-government, right? So at the provincial level, the two important rulers were to be the Viceroy and his executive council. They were to be one ruler. The other ruler was to be the elected members of the legislative council, and the legislative council, which will now would be composed in majority of elected Indians. So elected Indians were to be a majority in the provincial legislative councils now, and these legislative councils were to appoint their ministers. They had now the power to make laws, etc. also. Okay, so now this was a kind of a functional government that was formed at the legislative level at the provincial level for the first time. They could appoint their ministers, pass their laws, implement their new policies, etc. But that was, so the Indians were given a part of the rule. So one archy was in the hands of Indians, another archy was in the hands of the Governor General and his executive council. तो जैसे यही इसीलिए बोल रहा था, through understand this Kejriwal is going to be very useful. So just like you had Kejriwal on one side and the Lieutenant Governor on the other, Najeeb Jung. So this is Kejriwal, this is Najeeb Jung. Now अब तो चलिए ठीक है, whatever. So to understand, it would be useful that the Indian ministers who were to be elected members of the legislative council after the elections were to be happen under this law, these Indian ministers would have a control of what were to be called as transferred subjects. ट्रांसफर अभी जैसे आप यूनियन लिस्ट, कंकरेंट लिस्ट, स्टेट लिस्ट पढ़ते हैं, ये वो नहीं है, ठीक है. This is not like that, but similarly what you could argue that was that if you're saying that there are going to be two rulers, you're also going to divide the powers between the rulers. Otherwise the rulers will keep on fighting. Like in the absence of clear constitutional directive, Najib Jung and Kejriwal kept on fighting for a very long time, right? Unless and until it was made clear that, that the legislature cannot act without the consent of the Lieutenant Governor in case of Delhi. So in a similar manner, there had to be a division of powers so as to ensure that there is not a continuous friction between the Viceroy and his Executive Council and the elected members who are also going to form the ministers. So to divide the powers at the provincial level, the powers were to be divided into the transferred subjects or the reserved subjects. The reserved subjects were reserved for the Governor General, whereas the transferred subjects were kept or were transferred to the Legislative Council, which was composed of elected members. So what were these transferred subjects about? These were about issues such as education, health, local government, etc. So now the elected members of the Legislative Council could make a law for improving access to education, improving access to healthcare, making local governments or panchayat, etc. functional. But at the same point of time, what were the matters on which the British would not give up control? Finance, on law and order, on the army, on foreign relations, on all these aspects, it would not give any power to the provinces. So, on matters of finance, on matters of police or law and order, or on matters of communications, etc., these were kept as reserved subjects directly under the control of the Executive Council and the Governor General. लेकिन अभी तो प्रॉब्लम चालू हुई है. That though this was a division of power that the Government of India Act 1919 had proposed at the provincial level, this is all happening at the provincial level, not at the central level. Okay. So at the provincial level, though this was a division of power which was proposed, this was to turn out to be a hugely ineffective division of power, primarily because though all developmental works to improve the position of masses, all the developmental works and powers related to them had been granted to the elected members, for implementing policies on these aspects, the money that was to come from the Governor General. So there was no point in devolving such powers if the control of the finances was to be in the hands of the Governor General. So even if this division of transfer of power happened, or this division of powers between the reserved and the transferred lists happened, it turned out to be largely ineffective because the control of the finances was strictly under the hand of the Governor General, because that is what they are more interested in, right? The Britishers were more interested. So that is why they did not give the control of the power of finances. अब जैसे आपने पॉलिटी में ये भी पढ़ा होगा आज, फॉर एग्जाम्पल, दैट द गवर्नर जनरल कैन स्टिल रिजर्व अ बिल पास बाय, नहीं, दैट द गवर्नर कैन स्टिल रिजर्व अ बिल पास बाय द स्टेट लेजिस्लेचर फॉर द consent of the president and can veto it also and all these things, right? So at that point of time, the Governor General not just had a complete control of the reserved subject, but even if a law was made on the transferred subjects by the elected councils, the Governor General could still veto it. Without giving any explanation or anything, the Governor General could still veto a law that was passed with respect to the transferred subject also. तो पहले तो आपने पैसे नहीं दिए. Even when if we make a law to implement a policy without availability of finances, the Governor General could still veto. Okay, so effectively this meant that though an element of diarchy was introduced for the first time, diarchy, okay, I'm not saying provincial autonomy. I'm not saying that provinces are being given complete autonomy. Provinces are not being given complete autonomy. We will talk about provincial autonomy in Government of India Act 1935. ये सारे terms इसलिए important है that the Government of India Act 1919 brought in diarchy at the level of provinces. But what was the problem? Was that the division between reserved and transferred subjects kept the real powers only in the hands of the Governor General. And even when the division of powers had happened, the Governor General could still veto the laws that were made even with respect to the transferred subjects. तो ये हुआ provinces के level पे. इसके अलावा whether it was separate electorates, it continued. Whether it was separate electorates, it continued. Also, whether it was, and this is the first time when women were given the right to vote. It did not mean that all women had the right to vote, but yes, for the first time, women were made eligible for voting in after the Act of 1919. Also, what happened at the imperial level? ये तो सब कुछ provincial level पे हो रहा है, right? At the imperial level, what happened was that the size of the legislative council was increased further, and also some control over the budget was sought to be given for the first time. So वो उतना important नहीं है. जो हमें prelims के लिए importantly याद रखना है वो ये सब diarchy level पे. What was diarchy? देखिए कई बच्चे इसे confuse करते हैं कि we are devolving powers at the central level, at the state level, we are dividing powers at the state level, so this is also a kind of federal structure. ये prelims में भी कई बार statement आता है कि the Government of India Act 1919 envisioned a federal structure for British India. No, this is a wrong statement. Why this is a wrong statement is that yes, province पे government बन रही थी, लेकिन provinces had no complete autonomy. It was the Governor General who could still interfere in the provinces, and the kind of vetoes and the powers that Governor General had with respect to provinces meant that there was no autonomy for the provinces. Okay, so provincial autonomy nahi hai. This is not a blueprint of a federal structure also. The blueprint of the federal structure came in 1935, but it was also never completely implemented. We'll talk about that also. But provincial autonomy is 1935, proposed federal structure is also 1935, not 1919. And at the central level, the Legislative Council was there. The idea of separate electorates continued. Women were given the right to vote for the first time. और देखिए, one important thing was, एक चीज और, ये prelims के लिए extremely important है, that the Montagu-Chelmsford reforms का aim itself, the committee itself said that the aim of introducing these reforms is to establish self-government in India and devolving powers so that in future we can enable the rise of a self-government in India where it is largely in the hands of Indians. Okay, so the Montagu statement said that the gradual development of self-governing institutions with a progressive realization of self-government for Indians was to become an official government policy. इसका मतलब क्या हुआ? इसका मतलब ये हुआ कि if Indians were to demand self-government from now on, that was not a seditious activity, because the government itself is saying that we want to establish self-governing institutions in India. So this is the objective of the Montagu-Chelmsford reform, जो आपको prelims के लिए पता होना चाहिए. In contrast to this, in 1909, the Morley-Minto reforms at that point of time, Morley-Minto had made it clear the aim of introducing these reforms is not to establish any self-government in India. Okay, so unlike the Morley statement of 1909 that the reforms were not intended to give self-government, so the reforms of 1909, अगर ये statement आता है that the reforms of 1909 were not intended to give self-government to Indians, that's a correct statement. The reforms of 1919 intended to establish self-governing institutions in India, that's also a correct statement. लेकिन उल्टे correct नहीं है, right? So that is there. Now at the provincial level, I told you that there was diarchy at the provincial level. Secondly, and there were reserved subjects which were reserved for the Governor General, and these were finance, taxation, law and order, everything that was related to a direct control. The subjects that were transferred to Indians or the elected Indians in the legislative councils were health, local government, education, etc. That was transferred. However, the Governor General could interfere even with the transferred subjects, could veto even a law passed on such aspects, and for implementing these developmental policies, the finances were still in the control of the Governor General. So the division of power was largely ineffective. Now, also the provincial councils were expanded with the idea 70% data कुछ याद रखने की जरूरत नहीं है, but what you need to know is that now for the first time majority were not just going to be Indians but going to be elected Indians at the provincial levels. Separate electorates continued. Women were given the right to vote for the first time. This all happened. At central government, it still continued largely without a responsible government, and the Governor General continued to be the important player. Also, now at the central level also, the right to vote was given. But even here, the right to vote to the Legislative Council basically was only up till the 25% of the budget. And even now, most of the people in the Legislative Council were not elected Indians. So, by and large, they're not giving any effective control of the finance to Indians either at the central level or at the provincial level. So, the drawbacks of the 1919 Act was limited franchise, because even now, the right to vote was not made universal. Secondly, at the central level, there was no control over the Governor General. The Governor General was in complete charge of the Imperial Legislative Council also. So whatever changes were introduced, they were introduced at the provincial level. The Government of India Act promised diarchy at the central level or provincial level? Provincial level. तो देखिए वही होता है, गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया एक्ट अगर आपके उसमें आता है prelims में question that the Government of India Act introduced diarchy. Yes, that's a correct statement. If it comes diarchy at the provincial level, that is also correct. But diarchy at the central level, no. Right? तो statement पूरा पढ़ें, सिर्फ diarchy देख के आप टिक नहीं मार दीजिए, ये also देखना है that whether it's at the provincial or the central level. At the provisional it is written it's provincial. Okay? That at the provincial government, at the level of the provincial level, the elected individuals had no control over the finances. That was also a feature. And so these were the weaknesses also. And one finds that the moderates also were not very satisfied with the Montagu-Chelmsford reforms. Because na to central level pe koi devolution of power happened. Whatever devolution of power happened at the provincial level, it was very ineffective. Because the control of finances continued to be in the hand of the Governor General, and Governor General could still veto the activities even with respect to the transferred subjects. So this all led to a huge disappointment even with the Montagu-Chelmsford reforms, even to Tilak, even to the moderates. Okay, and what happened after this? Next class. Any doubt still here on this Government of India Act? Okay, so if you want to ask me even after the class, you can do so.